Already got my food. Something to hold me over while I watch this. So, yes, I got several videos lined up. May improvise and take some other videos to react to intermittently between each video, maybe. But otherwise, I do have a roster of mostly Warhammer related things to react to. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. So, every Warhammer fantasy faction explained by Pancreas Network. Now, I did an initial reaction to this video on one of my VODs. I was the Stellar Blade video. And while I did listen and fairly engaged with the video as much as I could while waiting for the game to officially become available to play, I do feel like that I feel like I could have given that one I feel like I give that video a bit more of a respectable go at it, right? So I thought I'll do a re-reaction of every Warhammer Fantasy faction explained. That way, the ideas that were introduced get to settle in a little more, and plus, it becomes one of those, it becomes one of those things that I could actually sit down and rewatch again to pick up things that I missed. And it's got ideas in here and explanations about certain factions that I probably need to hear multiple times, to be fair. And while some of them are very self-explanatory, there are others in the fantasy setting that are just, I think if I like a moment of pause and thinking about it for a second might do wonders for me. But otherwise, yes. That is basically the gist of why I am re-reacting to this particular video. It also just, I feel bad for Pancreas because, like someone also recommended it to me, and Pancreas seemed to he really did a really good job with the video. And I feel kind of like I was disrespecting him a little bit when I was cycling between that and the Stellar Blade game to see when that was available. So yeah, just want to re-react to it. I may release the initial video because I do have that in like in the background somewhere, debating if I should release it or not. But otherwise, yes. Without further ado, let us just jump right into it.
I like when people get into Warhammer. It's always a joy to have more people to play with and interact with in the hobby space. It's a new chance for me to try and convert anyone, into accepting that the Eldar are actually really cool and interesting, and please just for 5 minutes stop saying elf bad. But speaking of elves, every time there's a wave of people that first learn about Warhammer, there's always one thing in common with them.
I mean, to be fair, I haven't heard anyone say that elves are bad, so I don't know what he's talking about there.
None of them realize there's more to Warhammer than Space Marines, Tyranids, and spikier Space Marines. There's a whole other pair of settings that also exist, and they just fly right under the radar half the time. And this sucks, because the best Warhammer setting is right there. Yeah, GW ended it, but then it came back, and if you don't want to, you don't even have to collect thousands of dollars of minis to play with this one. Kind of. Warhammer Fantasy has been around longer than even 40k. It's had its ups, it's had its downs, it got blown up for a little bit, but thanks to Total War, Vermintide, and the constant nagging of the community, you can once again play in the old world. With elves, dwarves, and humans as standard, but also some more out-there races, such as magical frogs, rats, and Walmart shoppers. And not enough people know about them. Not nearly enough, and not nearly enough
Can confirm.
setting is even a thing. So I'm gonna be doing my part today. Today I'm gonna learn you all about every faction in Warhammer Fantasy. Some of them had extensive army lists and plot relevance, some of them languished when unupdated army books for years on end, and some of them until recently were relegated to about 3 pages of background lore. Doesn't matter, we're doing it all. If you can conceivably consider it an actual faction, they'll be here. Think of it as a companion to this video. That one was me trying to overview the setting as a whole, and this one is about the groups of people in the setting. So let's dive into a world of fantasy, and see what all that nonsense about them having the Warhammer is all about. But you're about to start listening to me list off all kinds of factions, and do you know what you could be listening to me with? Raycon and their Everyday Earbuds, the sponsor of this video.
That's the funniest part too, isn't it? Is that there is an actual like Warhammer for which the series is based off of in the setting, but there isn't like any fantastical Warhammer in 40k, which is kind of funny.
Raycon's everyday earbuds are some of the finest available on the market, and they've got a new and improved version just to go that extra mile. Let's just get right into the features of these bad boys. Multi-point connectivity, so if you and someone else want to share the music, you can with no problems. Active noise cancellation, because sometimes the outside world just needs to take a step back for a bit. And a new sleek ergonomic design to make them look and feel better than ever before. It's even got a cool protective case to keep them nice and safe. I've got them colored in a nice purple in a galaxy-themed case. It's got a nebula on it and everything. It's nice. You can get them in other options, though. There's plenty of colors to choose from. You know what's better than that? A 32-hour battery life that gets 90 minutes of battery per 10 minutes of charging. I forget to charge my headphones pretty often, and combined with my complete and utter lack of patience, that's usually a bad thing. But the everyday earbuds got my back. You can just charge them up for a little bit, and they're good to go. I use them when I'm painting or assembling minis. It's nice and relaxing, and the sound quality lets me tune out the world and get into the swing of things. This is good because, as you can see, I have a lot of minis to work on. But even with your own shopping needs, you can still enjoy the Raycon everyday earbuds. Click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/pancreasnowork to get 15% off your Raycon purchase, plus free shipping. They're already half the price of other brands, and with my link, you can get them at an even better price. Spice up how you listen to music, podcasts, and more with Raycon's everyday earbuds. Now then, let's talk about where it all began. That's orc spelled with a C, by the way, not a K. But across the board,
Most
the
people I know
greenskins
use
of Warhammer
beats,
Fantasy
but
aren't that different from the ones in 40k, which is why
I've
we're
never
starting
tried
with them.
Raycon
They
personally,
like to fight, they're mushroom
so
people,
I wouldn't know
they're
anything
green.
about it.
If you took an orc from 40k and put him in a greenskin tribe in Fantasy, he probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Might wonder why no one has a decent Shuda hanging around, but he'd be content with his life regardless. He might even be happier, because these orcs have characters like Grimgor instead of Ghazghkull. There are no thinking and tactics for Grimgor, only beating everything near him to death. The greenskins used to have some pretty different lore, being closer to D&D than anything else. They had half-orcs, and they didn't reproduce with mushroom spores. Then as time went on, that was moved away from, and eventually we came to where we are now in the old world. That being that the orcs hopped a ride with the old ones' ships when they came to the Warhammer Fantasy.
You know, that's interesting, isn't it? Now that I think about it, a lot of popular fantasy settings usually portray orcs as being able to reproduce in some fashion, but most of the time, it's through some alternative means, right? Like in Lord of the Rings, I believe how the orcs are made is that they basically like have this sort of like this I don't know what it is, but they have like an entire canyon where they just like they have all of this weird sort of like this weird sort of like I don't know I don't know what you call it, but they have all of this biomass in this canyon, and through this biomass they create more orcs. I don't remember how or why it's done this way, but that's how they've been doing it. And I think how they do it, right? If I remember, because it was explained to me once, was that they essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, not really paraphrasing, but I'm kind of trying to remember, so don't quote me for this. I believe how they do it is that they take the bodies of already deceased warriors, ones that have actually managed to kill at least a good few of them or whatever, take it back to Mordor, and then throw the body into one of these biomass related things, have them incubate in there for a bit, and then they turn into an orc. I think that's how it works. And if not, that would be an interesting way to make it work, but yeah. I'm not sure. But it seems like a lot of fantasy settings, when they have orcs, they definitely seem to reproduce in a way that isn't as simple as just like, oh, they do the coitus, yeah, they do the deed, so to speak. So as far as like between fungi and however these people reproduce, in fact, how did he say they reproduce now? I got so lost in the sauce thinking about it that I do not know how they reproduce in this setting. Oh yeah, how would they reproduce in typical D&D as well? That's another interesting question. You know what? We'll just leave it and move on.
And reproduce with mushroom spores. Then as time went on, that was moved away from, and eventually we came to where we are now in the old world. That being that the orcs hopped a ride with the old ones' ships when they came to the Warhammer fantasy world. More on them later. From there, they naturally began spreading out across the entire world. The old ones and their servants did their best to get rid of the orcs, as they did all other races they weren't quite fond of, but you can't get rid of the orcs once they're on a planet. It's just not possible. So nowadays, if you wander around a given area long enough, chances are you'll find some greenskins kicking about, making things worse for whoever lives there. The orcs themselves are one of the biggest similarities between the two settings.
So they do
Biggest
reproduce
guy's in
from
charge of
spores
a
in this
tribe,
world.
and if you get a real big boss, he might be in charge of multiple tribes. And when you get a really big boss, you can get a whole proper WoW going. When this happens, you usually get a whole lot of dead humans and dwarfs. Painting something red still makes it go faster, painting it blue makes it luckier, and can block arrows from killing the blue-painted orc. And they still love looting. Not nearly as much as in 40k, but you can always find an orc in a tribe wearing dwarf plate armor, or wielding a human greatsword he grabbed off a corpse. They do have some more savage brethren who judge other orcs for using things like basic tools, or digging a pit to shit in rather than just letting it drop where you stand.
Is this orc
But
like
aside
some
from
kind of
being a bit more
jester,
magical, those
or
orcs aren't
what?
really all that different. Where you get the biggest change, though,
Or
is
do
with
they
the
just color their
goblins.
shamans
See, in
very
40K,
particularly?
Grots are an entire species of plot of relevance to the orcs. You'll get one like Makari once in a blue moon who are allowed to be in the shadow of the spotlight of a far more famous orc, but the goblins in fantasy are an actual threat all by themselves. Sure, they're still cowardly and will refuse a stand-up fight unless they outnumber the enemy 40-1. Sure, they're still kicked around by the orcs and are used to do all the manual construction stuff. And sure, they're
So what
still
he's saying is that
smarter than
the
orcs,
Night
so
Lords are
anything
the
resembling
goblins of
any
the
actual
40k
construction or
universe.
research is done by them. But every now and then, not often, but every now and then, you get a goblin who's a cut above the rest. And when that happens, everyone's in trouble. The goblins are cunning little buggers.
You know, with some of the things that I hear about the Night Lords and some of the characters that are featured in the Night Lord faction, I almost want to say that the Goblin comparison is actually pretty appropriate. But yeah, they're just like walking death machines, but with Goblin level of intelligence and Goblin level of tactics.
They know in a straight up fight they're gonna lose, so they'll wait till the biggest orc around is sleeping and slit his throat, or poison his food, or convince him there's something shiny in a nearby cave filled with hungry trolls. And sometimes, if they're really insane, they'll overdose on literally magic mushrooms, and when they come back to reality, they've slaughtered every orc in charge in a manic frenzy. Now instead of a big green moron who just about knows which way is forward leading the army, you have someone like Skarsnik leading an orc army. A green little Sun Tzu who's gonna run circles around you and your entire military. Or you can get one that pretty much just lucks into the position, like Grom the Paunch, hallowed be his girth. Instead of being clever, he just got incredibly lucky and was forced to eat troll meat. Instead of exploding, which is normally what happens when you do that, he just kept growing alongside it. 3 things happened. 1, he got so incredibly fat he'd beat rival orcs by sitting on them. 2, he became a legend among goblins everywhere. The alpha male fantasy they all wish they could be. And 3, he nearly ended the world.
Oh yeah, the alpha male fantasy of just sitting on your ass and doing literally nothing. Kind of like what I'm doing. The true peak fantasy of all alpha men or men who yearn to be alpha. In all seriousness, though, I don't think anybody likes the idea of sitting around collecting girth. And if women don't like it, I'm sure there's a good portion of men who don't. I don't have this problem particularly because I mean I'm a scrawny bitch, but you know, like I have a fast metabolism. So fat just kind of rolls off, just kind of rolls off of me. But you know, I do know some people who are of this variety, and I don't know how they would feel about that, about the idea of being fat. But I do know that they probably don't like it nearly as much as they would if they were probably just a little slimmer. You know, like it's just how it is, especially since everybody knows that, you know, a lot of people hate fat dudes and they do fat women. So, you know, take that for what you will. I mean, I say hate, but I think they're both disliked equally on the attractiveness scale. It's just the problem is just one is more acceptable to shit on than the other. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. But yeah.
by sailing from the equivalent of the Middle East or Africa to the middle of the Atlantic and destabilizing the High Elves. If you like grots but wish they could, do anything important never, maybe take a look at the goblins. Their history really isn't anything special though, mostly because they're greenskins and what you see is what you get. Usually, they beat each other up. Every now and again, one of them beats up enough orcs that he convinces them all to go beat someone else up instead. This continues
Interesting
until
that they have
war
guns
boss
and
is killed,
flintlocks in
and then
this
the orcs
setting.
disband and go back to beating each other up again. Some evil dwarfs like to use them as slaves, and when they tried to make bigger, stronger, and smarter orcs to use as slaves, they immediately learned why that was a bad idea when the orcs revolted. If you like being mean and green, you'll like the orcs. And one crucial thing I nearly forgot, they love to dance. Wurzag may be the prophet of the orc gods first, but he's a hell of a dancer second. Now let's get out of the realm of similarities and into some things fantasy really does different. When the
Lizardmen.
old ones showed up, the planet they arrived on was ideal for creating the ultimate weapon to fight chaos. Of course, they still had to create it. So to do that, they started by moving the planet closer to the sun to warm it up, which pissed off a lot of things on it, like the dragons. Speaking of, there were a lot of races on the planet that wouldn't really like to share the room with the Old Ones' creations. So to help them with the legwork, as well as get rid of all those fellas, the Old Ones created the Lizardmen. They also created most of the other playable races in the setting, so unless otherwise stated, assume all these factions started out as the test tube babies of the Old Ones in one way or another.
It's interesting that the old ones exist in every fiction, in every Warhammer fiction so far.
You know how I said the orcs resisted extermination by the Old Ones? That was just them who managed it. Everyone else
They created the orcs and the Eldar in 40k, and now they created the Lizardmen in fantasy.
Lizards, dinosaurs, or angry lizards riding dinosaurs. With that small little bit of genociding out of the way, the Old Ones set about making the world fit their needs. The Lizardmen were their chief assistants, and to be the best secretaries they could possibly be, the Old Ones made them in several different flavors. All of them with a dash of Mesoamerican cultures thrown in, because if you have the option to have Aztec lizard riding dinosaurs, you have no good reason not to take it. First you have the Slann. The Slann are the best wizards in all the world. They may be big fat toad people, but the first generation ones were the ones who changed the entire planet's orbit, moving around where it needed to be in space. Moving down the generational line, they did get weaker, but that's highly relative. Second generation Slann could only cause entire mountain ranges to suddenly appear at the drop of a hat. These were the Lizardmen who directly worked with the Old Ones, and delivered their messages and will to the rest of them. Next you have the Saurus. Stupid people might think that since the Lizardmen are a Bronze Age civilization at best, they're not much of a threat. Then an 8-foot-tall monster from the Cretaceous period clubs you to death with an obsidian axe, and you find
I forgot to turn on captions, my bad, folks.
These were the generals of the Lizardmen armies. They were bred for war and only war. They're pretty straightforward, and all their characters have the same background of...
It's not like I watch videos on this channel in my spare time. I have my own account for that. Do you think that it would just keep my captions options, but maybe I'm doing something else on the channel that inevitably leads me to take off captions sometimes? Yeah, now that I think about it, when I edit videos, sometimes I have to turn off the captions just so I know if the quality's coming in right, and having big blocky text on screen doesn't help.
Break it down to its simplest possible form. Next are the skinks. They're little chibi gecko axolotl things that do to the day-to-day management of Lizardmen society. You need a building planned out or to do basic diplomacy, you send the skinks. They're also skirmishers. When the trees start speaking great planese, it's the skinks doing it. They've even got their own god all to themselves, Sotek. It was a bit of a controversy when he came around at first, but the rest of the Lizardmen seemed content enough to let him be worshipped. Finally, we have the Croxagors. They're alligator men. They build the buildings and gator death roll all over enemy armies. That's it, but that's all they need to do. When Chaos first came and the Old Ones fled, the Lizardmen had to figure out how to not only survive, but continue the Old Ones' work in their absence, which they kind of sort of have been pulling off a little bit. They held off the invasion at the cost of almost all the first Slann and most of their spawning pools, turning them into a very numerically disadvantaged race. Not that this stops them from still sometimes rampaging across the world, but they are largely held up in the jungles of Lustria nowadays, also known as South America, because Warhammer Fantasy is just Earth if someone with really shaky hands drew a map of it. They're isolationists, the Slann will spend centuries at a time meditating on...
Yeah, the maps in this world look fucking gnarly, but that's probably for strategy game purposes.
Because it's usually to steal those plaques. They're all gold, you see, because gold doesn't tarnish or rust. Convenient for writing things down in a jungle, less convenient when all the warm bloods come to steal the shiny stuff. If you see a Lizardman army, you're either screwed because the Great Plan dictates your death, or screwed because you're somewhere they don't think you should be. Very simple faction, but again, that's a positive. Sometimes being dino-brained is the way to go. Also known as the Imperium, but not as awful. These guys are the default protagonist faction. They're the strongest nation of men in the world, and that's no meaningless boast here, because there's actual competition they have in that department, unlike the Imperium. They formed about 2,500 years prior to the setting's modern day, when a pretty cool dude named Sigmar was born. Sigmar had a dream, uniting the scattered tribes of barbarian into one unified nation of mankind, to drive back the darkness and bring peace to the land. He did this chiefly by beating up everyone who disagreed with him, but in fairness, most of them deserved it. If this sounds familiar, let me just remind you that this guy was here first. Plus, Sigmar realized that outright killing everyone just because they disagree with you is perhaps a bad idea that will.
I mean, to be fair, in this, from what I've seen from the initial video, the fantasy setting is a little bit more, I don't know if I would say more metal, but it's certainly a lot pettier than in 40K, whereas they took the sort of the pettiness factor of the fantasy setting, as well as some of the crazy shit that happens to it, and then moved it over to 40K. They just did, what they did is that they took similar races and things from the fantasy settings to the grimdark future setting, and they just put a lot more grimdark into the setting. Like, they replaced a lot of the pettiness with just a lot of just, like, really fucked up shit. Really fucked up shit in stories. It's arguable that this is probably still a grimdark, like, setting. I'm sure it has some of its own grimdark stories, but 40K is known for being fucked up in creative and unique ways. I haven't heard anyone talk about fantasy Warhammer in that same light, so this one seems more of like a straightforward setting about people with their own interests kind of clashing over their own specific philosophical ideals, as well as special interests.
Will lead to problems later down the line, so he settled for only beating them up. Sigmar didn't just beat up people, though. He also beat up a lot of orcs. Like, a whole lot of orcs. So many orcs that the dwarfs swore eternal friendship with mankind, because if Sigmar is so kick-ass, surely the rest of humanity can't be that bad either. He united most of the tribes of man in the area, and you better believe I'll come back to the most later, and formed the Empire of Man. 50 years later, he just up and left. A little bit after that, he became a god, and the Empire soon worshipped Sigmar as the chief god of their pantheon. The Empire is pretty unique as far as fantasy factions go. Usually a fantasy setting will reach the medieval era, and then very explicitly never move past that for the next trillion years of its history. The Empire isn't like that. When Sigmar was doing his thing, it was barely the Iron Age. The dwarfs giving them steel weapons every now and then was considered the height of technological advancement. Nowadays, 2,500 years later, the Empire has tanks. Good tanks? Yeah. Look, for a Renaissance age civilization, tanks are pretty damn impressive no matter how good they actually are. They have factories, mechanical horses, and countless other things that make you wonder if the book you're reading was put in the fantasy section by mistake. They also have wizards who scam people out of $50 for the thrill of it, politicians who constantly need to be wrangled by the one competent guy in the entire government, and enough floppy.
Boy, ain't that the fucking truth. I'm not getting into this, but God, does it feel like the government just needs an absolute shakeup sometimes.
Hats to arm the entire Holy Roman Empire with. They're still normal people, though. The three things that make the Empire great aren't genetically modified super soldiers, or lost technological secrets from a golden age, or even the direct intervention of their gods. It's faith, steel, and gunpowder. A whole lot of each. Give a man a halberd, a cause to fight for, and his friends by his side, and it turns out you can push back even the most determined of evil murder Vikings time and time again. Most Warhammer fantasy books follow the Imperial characters around, and you get a good feel for just how fleshed out this land is through them. You've got the Heartlands, sure, places like Altdorf where it's interconnected with the wider world, magic runs through the very city through its colleges of magic, and elves and dwarfs can be seen regularly. Then you have backwater shitholes like Ostermark, where the people are outnumbered by everything nearby that wants to kill them, and guns are still a scary black magic invention for a good half the population. Or Averland, whose most noticeable trait is that they hunt halflings for sport there. There's halflings in the Empire, by the way. They can vote on the next emperor because they baked a previous one a really good meal. They also had a civil war over pie. Don't be a halfling in Averland. You're gonna decorate someone's mantelpiece sooner or later. Of course, this is still Warhammer, fantasy or not. Sure.
I mean, what's the real difference between a halfling and a dwarf? One's more commerce focused, the other one is just good natured. Like, what's the real brass tacks on between the dwarfs and the halflings? Because I feel like halflings do a similar thing. They're just sneakier about it. But I don't know.
Sure, I said it's not as awful as the Imperium, but it still has witch hunters who will burn you alive for being a wizard, or being a mutant, or just for being a bit too ugly, because that's also a sign of chaos mutation. And it's still a Renaissance age civilization. For 90% of people, this means it's a medieval civilization, but you might see more pretty statues and paintings than your ancestors did. You're still probably gonna die of the water making you poop too much. They're bordered by the undead, beastmen are everywhere
Fucking
once you hit the
dysentery,
city
man.
limits, and worst of all, they have people who have sex with horses for neighbors. The Empire is constantly on the defense. From orcs, from chaos, from beastmen, which are a different kind of chaos, and really anyone else who's feeling a bit bored that day. But the average citizen of the Empire will do their part to keep the hordes at bay, and at the end of the day, they did this for 2,500 years until the authors decided reality itself had to go, which is a pretty good track record. They're a human, relatable nation, like if the Imperial Guard got to actually be the main characters of 40k instead of Space Marine 9001, model on sale now for $60. It's grounded with
I mean, that's a fair point to make, I would say. Everybody likes the Cadians. Everybody stands for Cadia. I think that that absolutely seems entirely valid. Though, you have to admit, when your power scaling is as broken as it is in 40k, we have to kind of just recognize that there is no way in God's green earth you're not going to make the 8-foot tall or 7-foot tall behemoth and a fucking armor that's the equivalent of a battle tank, not the fucking main character of your setting. And that's kind of ultimately the point of why Space Marines, like, are the biggest focus and draw when it comes to Warhammer 40k, is because they're a little different from the other shit that you could find in the stores. Plus, again, when you have something that cool looking, that gnarly looking in a setting, of course you're going to want to show it off. Of course you're going to want to make a shit ton of it. Because why wouldn't you? Especially when you can give it pretty colors, among other things. Like, they are very much the paladins, the knights of your setting, and you want to decorate them about as well as any other fantasy knight should. So it makes sense why Space Marines are the focal point of the 40k setting. As far as, because especially since, like, you couldn't just use typical knights because, this is futuristic Warhammer, right? This is the grim dark future. And you can't exactly not put knights into the setting without first going big or going home. So naturally, following this mindset, right, Games Workshop essentially made an entire not just entire factions based off of this point, but entire gameplay mechanics around, just with equal amounts of fucking people over. And also inventing units that could go toe-to-toe with just about anything or anyone, decimate even small armies even. I mean, like, the Eldar get a lot of flack for how squishy they are, but goddamn if they're not all psychers, and goddamn if they probably couldn't just absolutely destroy you if given the opportunity. But yeah, that's the kind of shit that Warhammer 40k has to contend with. So making the Cadians the supposed protagonists of the setting, while that would be an interesting idea, normal humans are in positions of power. I think having the Cadians be the focal point of the stories is kind of debatable because, most Cadians end up dying the moment they're deployed anyway. So they throw the Imperium of Man throws people at problems for a reason. It's because they don't know how to actually logic their way out of most encounters, which is why the Cadian regiment, among other sort of like military regiments, are fucking massive in scope and size. The Cadians in particular being the biggest one with the greatest level of ordnance to work with. So, yeah. A lot of this makes sense on paper. Anyways, moving on.
people having normal struggles, but also fantastical, with wizards and monsters being everywhere. They do have one ultimate ace in the hole, though, the reigning emperor, Karl Franz. The best statesman in the old world, the guy who wields the Warhammer. You know the one, the actual real-life Warhammer logo? That's his, and he's very good at using it. He's the kind of politician who could convince you into giving him everything you own and leave you thinking you got the better deal, but also...
Which is important to note because that makes him infinitely better than even certain other emperors from other fantasy settings, as well as the other one that is the alternative to this one. I mean, a fair and benevolent emperor, one that takes the place of the ones that came before, is a idea and is a story that is certainly worth mentioning. I feel like, though, that, you know, like, Sigmar and the, you know, like, the interesting parallels between Sigmar and the Emperor are the ones that is mainly meant to be focused on, whereas Karl here is clearly meant to be, like, the next in line, so to speak. He's basically the Gilliman of this setting. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing, because Gilliman in the 40k setting is also equally just as cool, and as well as just as equally as likely to lead the Imperium down the path of something greater than most other Primarchs even. Like, I think that he would be a far better suited for leading the whole of the Imperium than Jagatai Khan, or God forbid Angron, but, you know, that's neither here or there. I think that, you know, like, if nothing else, Gilliman can serve as a bit of a statesman, whereas if most people had their way and their choice, they probably would elect Sanguinius into that position, but because Sanguinius is, you know, he's fucking dead, you know, that makes that proposition a bit difficult. It also adds a different level of complexity to the setting, which is they're bringing back Primarchs. How many Primarchs are they going to bring back before they eventually, like, move the story in a different, unique direction? That's a question that I'm wondering. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and just leave it at that.
The kind of person who wouldn't do that to you. He's got everyone's interest at heart, and overall, this guy's the best emperor in Warhammer. Not Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer in general. Kiss my ass, corpse worshippers. This one will walk, talk, and beat you to death in the name of the Empire. If you like relatable folk with a touch of the fantastic, Sigmar and his people have your back. But I did say most tribes are united by Sigmar. Unfortunately, a couple weren't able to be integrated for one reason or another. Let's talk about the one that I like first. Kislev is all of Eastern Europe thrown into a pot and mixed to boiling until it coagulated into one Slavic specialty stew. They live in a frozen hellhole, which is also their country's greatest defense. They wear thick fur pelts. They have winged hussars. They also squat in the middle of a battlefield, because such is the natural state of the Kislevite. And vodka. Even the dwarfs and their genetically ingrained alcoholism respect the drinking skills of a Kislevite. Kislev's job in the setting is to face tank chaos invasions before they get to the Empire of Man.
Smugalana must exist in this universe. You know, her avatar would work strangely well for this setting.
Everyone occupying their land freezes to death, come back in and rebuild. Their religion is different from the Empires and they view them as weak southerners, but the two nations are still staunch allies. Mostly because when the forces of actual hell are your neighbors, anyone else is going to be a good friend. They're led by the Tsar or Tsarina of Kislev, because GW was worried you wouldn't understand which region this place is based off of. Many times, and indeed the last one before the world blew up, this was an ice witch, a handy person to have running your country when a raging blizzard is considered a mild day. You still can't play as Kislev in the old world, thank you GW for that extreme blue balling, but they had some pretty heavy redesigns and a lot of the marketing for the old world did at one point feature Kislev. Here's hoping GW realizes that winged hussars riding bears is something people are interested in. Shame that sentence needs to be said. I don't know why anyone would ever need to be told that. Blat.
Winged hussars? What the hell did I just hear? Riding bears? People with wings riding bears, or bears with wings mountable by people? I'm kind of confused on that point. But otherwise, that sounds pretty fucking dope if you ask me. Why isn't GW on this?
These are those people who have sex with horses. When Sigmar was uniting everyone, they refused to join him, because obviously they were too good to join him. Did they have some super special magical secret or a technology that could let them surpass the fledgling?
I mentioned that to a friend of mine, just like, oh yeah, it's the faction that has sex with horses. And he was so confused. He's just like, what do you mean? It's just like, that's the meme, isn't it? They have sex with horses. And he's just like, what? I mean, not exactly, but, I mean, that's funny. He was so confused. He just didn't know how to respond to that. Just like, oh yeah, it's the faction that has sex with horses. Like, yeah, but they're also based off of the French. And it's like, well, yeah, they're based off of the French, which is probably why, despite the fact that they have the greatest advantage of all, which is cavalry, they get fucking bodied when they're not on horseback. Me and my friends make some pretty ham-fisted jokes.
Empire or some other race in the whole? No, but they copied the elves' homework and our French, so they decided they were too good to shack up with a future god and went it alone. Bretonia looked at all the cool advancements the Empire was making, how it was a dynamic.
I thought the Eldar were a bit more samurai focused than they were French. Especially with some of the things that I've heard about them from Bricky in particular, but I don't know. I know interpretations as well as inspirations can be a bit of a mix, right? Some people have their own interpretations on certain aspects of certain lore details, and when it comes to how factions are designed and made, they do take multiple inspirations, so you can definitely glean a few different types of ideas from a singular faction than most might suggest.
Dynamic nation in a genre that usually gets to the medieval era and then freezes like it's going into cryo-sleep, and said no, we will not be doing that. We will be staying as medieval land. It is mandated by the government that technology will not advance, that society will never have any major upheavals, and that everything is just perfect the way it is. It's like that old decree the Pope made that declared crossbows were a blasphemous weapon, taken to be an entire society's philosophy. Bretonia is all about knights.
I don't know anything about crossbows, but... Or was it... Did he say crossbows or crossbows? I was looking at the caption when he said that.
Everything is just perfect the way it is. It's like that old decree the Pope made that declared crossbows were a blasphemous weapon, taken to be an entire society's philosophy. Bretonia's...
I think he's saying crossbows, and that makes... I don't know how accurate that is, though I will say, right, that, I had a thought and now I lost it. Shit. Definitely, I would say that... Shit, what the fuck was I gonna say? I was gonna mention something about technology and people and their uses of technology and technological advancement. I was gonna say something to around the question of this about the inventions and inventing things past a certain point. Shit. He was saying that they were perfect as things were. Nope, I've lost it. Damn it. That sucks. I had something I wanted to say, and now I don't know what it was anymore. Although, to be fair, right, the technology does have this tendency to fuck people over, I will admit. I mean, you have no better example of this than looking at our own country, looking at our own world, and seeing the same exact shit that, that could easily happen to other settings if it's allowed to get out of hand, right? I mean, look at humanity in 40K, like they had the best technology that there ever was. And then at the height of their hubris, when they thought things could not go nearly so wrong, the warp got really fucky, and suddenly they couldn't space travel no more. And so a lot of planets were left to fend for themselves and their own devices. And humanity was just kind of, they kind of went to shit. It's a tale as old as time, but the problem with that particular issue is that despite their technological advancement, they relied heavily on things that were just convenient to them. Again, the problem with technology is that it allows for too many conveniences. All right, just because you have the ability to make life that much easier for yourself, technologically speaking, that probably doesn't mean you should. I mean, again, we're having a lot of problems about, like jobs being taken away, about how certain so like your typical like job appointed things are currently being slowly weeded out because of the advent of technology, right? You got voice actors complaining about how their voices could be AI constructed to be used in works without actually having to hire the voice actors specifically. I mean, Fortnite's got a good example of this because the original Darth Vader actor had his voice and likeness put into the game of Fortnite with all of the funny memes that were born from that. It's an issue and a question that does prevail some people's minds, right? And as far as that stuff is concerned, I think some people do have a point. I think that people do have a point. I think that people have a point when they say that technology kind of fucks with things and kind of disenfranchises actual people from being able to do very specific things that they themselves would like to do professionally, right? Like it's a problem that's typically exclusive, but it's not mutually exclusive to any type of field. Like eventually we're all going to be weeded out of a job. It's just a matter of fact. It's just how things are going to be. If you can make the industrial process of shit easier, why would you not make it easier for yourself? And that's kind of where the technology kind of fucks with people. And as far as the AI voice acting, among other things, is concerned, I do think that while it is certainly a good point, I do feel like there are definitely, especially nowadays, like some people who are championing this cause are kind of dumbasses, and like even let's just I'm just gonna put it right here and now. Even before the SAG-AFTRA thing, right? Even before the Funimation voice actors became a member of SAG-AFTRA, I'm just saying they were already pieces of shit before they entered. And so I knew exactly how that was probably going to go as soon as they got into it, right? It was not that big of a leap in logic for me. All right. I've seen what these people were like in actuality during another big controversy that happened within the anime sphere, the fucking He Who Shall Not Be Named allegations. And, like, as much as I don't mind talking about that particular subject because it particularly interests me, I do know some people who have claimed that there are things said about a particular individual that is potential, that is actually, that are things that he is accused of that have actually happened to them because of him. And so I think that, it's clearly a topic that, for the lack of a better evidence, terms, and excuses, right? Like, it's an issue that is ever evolving. It doesn't have any clear and concrete answers, at least as far as I remember seeing it back when it was at the height of its fucking popularity. And I believe since my last looking at it, like a year after it started, and with the case being settled, the lawsuits being settled, everything, right? At the end of the day, the biggest takeaway I got from it was that a lot of the old Funimation voice actors, a lot of the old guard are real pieces of shit. And I would rather see that side of the industry just die. Just flounder and sputter into non-existence. I mean, if anyone's going to bring that shit down, if anyone's going to bring down the SAG-AFTRA movement, it's going to be those fucking people, let me tell you. And that's not even touching on some of the other bits of controversy they've been getting up to since that whole debacle as well. If it's not the localization changes for Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and other anime works, it's the fucking dumb shit that one of their voice actors got into when they were a part of some weird sort of scam involving some other company or studio, but that's neither here or there. The point is, like there's a lot of bad blood in that particular pie, and like it takes it took a lot of things to get to the point of arrival where it's just like, oh yeah, it's totally because, people just, you know, dislike these individuals. It's a little bit more than that. People have actual criticism, valid criticisms for wanting to shit on you. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you stand for something or because they just don't agree with the way you do things. No, no, no. You are literal garbage human beings. And I would rather see you all be put out of, be put out of business, let's be honest. And they're all individual business types. Okay, they're all professionals working independently because they're independent contractors, as according to many of their contracts from these companies. They're not actual employees; they're just hire-ons. So they don't actually have any real weight to speak of. The only reason why they want a fucking union is so that way they can bully the companies into capitulating to whatever demands that they want, which is typical for most unions, but that's neither here or there. I think it's understandable that people want to unionize for specific reasons, right? But when you go to as far as like we want to bully companies to giving us more things than we reasonably should have, that becomes a goddamn problem. And there's a reason why people hate unions. And there's also a reason why companies hate people who want to unionize. There are legitimate criticisms and reasons for unions. All right, let's just be fair and entirely honest. I just don't think that, especially not in the SAG-AFTRA movements of things, that getting those Funimation voice actors in there was the smartest idea, considering that it wasn't even started by the voice actors themselves. It was started by, I believe, the person who played as Fran Drescher in the Fran TV show. I don't even remember. It's a whole bit. Anyways, I got lost in that sauce. But ultimately, right, technology does add a certain level of convenience to life. And when it does that, it kind of trivializes other things, and it trivializes your own ability to think and do things. And so you might say that you could become more focused on certain other aspects in your life due to this convenience, but I feel like it needs an equal balance, right? We need people who can do tasks and can do the things, while simultaneously we need to give people, we need to make it easier to be able to focus on other things, right? I think when it comes to entertainment and entertainment purposes, AI might have a leg room to stand on, but if you're already weeding out like actual craftsmanship and literal trade skills out of the market, then don't be trying to fucking remove people's ability to work in the entertainment industry, because that's just gonna fuck people over even more. Like, if people could just create AI generated arts using the stylings of favorites, a favorite artist, such as like their favorite anime artist or their favorite fucking manga artist, or even like their favorite painters, like Van Gogh, for example. Like if people can create AI generated art based off of a particular stylings of things of their favorite artists, and then post that as like original, that becomes a level of that's a level of fuckery we need to kind of address. And I think that there's absolutely a valid criticism for a lot of those issues. I just think that it needs to be handled with a bit more care and depth than just simply strong-arming people into capitulating to the idea that, yeah, not only should you not use AI to better your own company, to make it more convenient, to not pay professional actors to do their God-given job of being professional actors. No. You should not use the AI, but on top of that, right, you should also give us a lot more money and also capitulate to our demands on what we think is acceptable for the hiring process. That's where things get a little fucky now, doesn't it? But anyways, that's neither here or there. I don't need to go back onto this topic. Point being, technology breeds a level of convenience, and when people get too complacent, they start getting really fucking weird. And you don't need to look any further than the fucking Eldar to know that to be true. if things are not nearly as challenging, we just start looking for problems to make for ourselves. I mean, like, humanity is also just as much as guilty as the Eldar in that description. You know, like, we will absolutely go looking for petty indulgences and petty conveniences to basically kind of, like, challenge our life and to challenge our lifestyles, among other things, right? We will chase the pettiest things for the sake of feeling something, right? And I feel like that humanity could easily go down that route as the same way as the Eldar did if they allow themselves to take that direction, which they haven't. And in fact, they're very religiously stringent on not going down that direction, so much so that they replaced all AIs with servitors, which are just lobotomized humans. So, yeah. The humanity of the 40k universe is willing to do some fucked up shit to avoid the problems and issues that comes with the added convenience of technology. But anyways, I've harped on this long enough. It's a whole topic. It's a whole bit. You could probably get an entire video's worth out of that particular topic alone, but it is certainly an issue that needs analyzing, and I think it's an issue that every company and that every person, right, needs to ask themselves at some points. It's just like, is it worth the convenience of having automation in my company, or would it be best if I hire some actual professionals at the end of the day? You know, like, it is a question, and you know, it's really up to the person on what they want to do with the added use and advent of technology. But ultimately, I think that, you know, especially nowadays, you know, like, with the fact that, you know, so many of the elites seem to care so much about the about the illegals in the country. You know, you think that, you know, like, they would just hand those jobs over to Americans and not give a shit about the fact that there are such sad, desperate illegals in the country. But, you know, far be it for me to want to, like, ask them or even suggest that they should deter cheap manual labor away from the labor market. I mean, how dare I?
It's all about knights. Baby knights proving themselves, magical knights defending the realm, and
And before anyone gets it twisted, you know that's how they think of it. All right, every time they talk about this subject, they're always just like, "Oh, but these people are meat pack. They help pack our foods in meat packing plants. They're the people who help water our crops. They till our fields. They harvest our cotton and all these other things. They are fucking on the nose about the fact that they're just slave wagers. They're just slave wages. They don't actually care about them. They just care about the fact that they're just cheap, affordable labor. All right? They're no different than the fucking sweatshop. They treat these people like they're no different than the fucking sweatshops over in China. It's no different. It's no different. And there's definitely some differences there. All right, granted, but it's kind of the similar reasons why we have companies make circuit boards and shoes and other things over in China rather than here, and why we would prefer cheap, affordable labor here rather than hire actual Americans who actually would want a decent wage and salary for their efforts. All right, it's all the same thing. Why would you want to get, right, someone who a self-respecting individual who would love to till your fields, who would love to do these things for a decent wage, when you could just get someone who's willing to do the same level of process and effort for like $5? It's like, all right, are you fucking kidding me? There are actual reasons for this. Some of them legally and morally ambiguous, but and ethically too. Of course, there's all the things, but it's a problem that exists solely in a vacuum. And it's really hard to police that shit. You cannot fuck with this. Harder than the people who stand for this issue have already fucked with it already. Like, it's one thing, right, to feel bad for people who are in the country trying to escape from the shithole that is their own nation and their own culture. It's another thing when your excuse for defending them is literally just like, oh, but they're easy, cheap, affordable labor. Why would you want to do that? It's like, how about you get a fucking wellness check, my guy? It's like, Jesus fucking Christ. And they're certainly not doing themselves any favors either, to be fair. I mean, they're assassinating politicians now, the last I heard. And, you know, I don't agree with that shit. I mean, as funny as the Luigi Mangione situation was, I don't fuck with that. You know, like, you're gonna start assassinating people. That's when any sort of debate about whether or not you actually have leg room to stand on, you know, kind of goes out the fucking window. All right, just because the Unabomber had some interesting points, that doesn't mean that we should definitely accept the fact that the Unabomber is at all, you know, like, reasonable and or logical for the fact that he bombed the shit out of people and at one point was doing it randomly for literally no fucking reason. Okay, let's just be fair about this. All right. Just because somebody has an interesting point to make, that doesn't excuse the fact that they did terrible things to do it.
Saving damsels, knights.
That's it. That's all I'm saying.
The goals and interest of the rest of the knights. Imagine King Arthur. That's it. Just imagine King Arthur stretched out to be a whole faction. The in-universe justification is that they saw high elf cavalry and just ran with the concept. Out of universe, it's just King Arthur and every medieval stereotype thrown together. You could, admittedly, say the same thing about the Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, or Kislev in Eastern Europe, but those are eras and places fantasy writers don't usually copy wholesale, so they get a pass from me. Bretonnia is the land of almost every fantasy setting ever conceived since Lord of the Rings, and it shows. Unfortunately, they can afford to do all of this fantasy stasis, because an elf goddess is playing them like a fiddle. Their precious Lady of the Lake, also known as the Elf Goddess of Magic, chooses some super special knights to become Grail Knights. They sip from her chalice of bathwater, and when the now Grail Knight emerges, they're like supercharged D&D paladins. Bullets are an inconvenience, their armor is magically tough.
So what he's saying is that the Lady of the Lake is basically Amaranth and Belle Delphine mixed into one. Or just Belle Delphine. Either way, it's an e-thought. And this is her Horde of Sims. You know, for France, that's pretty appropriate. You know, I haven't heard a lot of great things about France, though I have heard some decent stuff about France. One thing I have heard consistently, though, from the bros, is that the women there are just fucking rude. They're just so fucking rude. Like, you could just be asking them a question. It's sorry you, but you know, like, that's just one of the things that I've been hearing from the guys, and clearly that seems like an appropriate stigma, to be honest. I mean, French history isn't exactly very glamorous for them, and their culture is also just as weird. But you know, that's neither here or there. Oh. Ah. Are we good? Yeah, we seem to be good. Okay. My OBS disconnected. Wonderful. Sorry about that. There was a slight buffer there. I don't know what happened there. You know, I could probably plug this in. That'll fix that problem. But yeah, generally speaking, you know, I've heard only bad things about the French people, and specifically from the women. I've heard other things. I find that the way that they police Paris is funny. I think it was Paris, but yeah. It's just recently I've heard of issues and stigmas relating to the women's side of things over in France, and it seems that people are going elsewhere to find decent women. So of course they probably thought, why not go to France? There's definitely going to be some self-respecting women there. They are all full of themselves. I gotta stop. I'm just, as soon as this thing fixes itself, because it looks like the connection's a little wonky again, I'm gonna fucking continue the. We are having a hard time right now, and I don't know why. I even plugged in the Ethernet cable to solve this problem. I hope this won't be a consistent problem this stream, but we'll just fucking ball with it. We'll just play ball. Anyways, it seems to be catching up a little bit. So I'm just gonna go ahead and play it and hope for the best.
And their mounts never tire, so until the Empire invents the Gatling gun, they're able to keep being aggressive backwater dickweeds. In older lore they were tolerable, but in modern lore someone must have felt they weren't
Oh my god, what is wrong with the connection right now?
angsty enough and made them nice and extra oppressive. The peasants are honored if the noble allows them to have 3 pennies a week instead of 2, ladies who aren't magical are property because medieval times, and social mobility is a punchline. I hope you like medieval medicine. The Empire's medicine already isn't that great. Bretonnian medicine is the kind of thing that has a 300% fatality rate. And horses. Everyone has a horse. Even the lowliest peasants have a horse that more often than not eats and lives better than they do. I like horses, but I don't like them that much. If you've ever been to medieval times and made that your entire personality, Bretonnia is a good faction for you. Because God is real and hates me, they're also one of the starter factions of the old world, so getting into Warhammer Fantasy nowadays is pound for pound fairly easily done with Bretonnia. In all honesty, pick them if you like them. It is on some level cool because for as much shit as I was giving them for being generic and bland knights, knights are cool. There's a reason every 5-year-old wants to be a knight and not a Landsknecht. I mean, for God's sakes, just trying to say that word is difficult. The other army GW has refused to put onto the tabletop despite already having a direct hand in reworking them for Total War. Did you know there's a fully fleshed out Cathayan army book for GW developed? You can't have it because funds not allowed. This is a shame because Cathay is awesome. Dragons are also awesome. Cathay agrees because they're ruled
Okay,
by
stable
immortal
now.
dragons who the Cathayans follow at every whim. Fantasy China is a magical place and one of the few places in the entire planet that might not be a terrible one to live in. Every now and again it does what actual China used to do and implodes, and sure, those ruling
I suppose it's the YouTube god's way of saying that you talk too much. You need to just let it go.
And it always comes back together after imploding.
And I shall.
Usually after mommy and daddy
I'll let it go for a bit.
come back to kick everyone's heads in until they start behaving again. It is, like I said, just fantasy medieval China. But that is a compliment. You know those terracotta soldiers? What if they were animated by magic and also 100 feet tall? Are you a 40k fan? Imagine if the Primarchs weren't utter morons and failures almost to a man. Because that's Cathay. Again, for reasons I will never understand, we don't have them yet in tabletop. But Total War does, and by God is it fun to play as Cathay. The Silk Road was prosperous in real life, and it's prosperous in Warhammer. So if/when they finally come out...
And then the opium attack. We're bringing out all the jokes. We're bringing out all the jokes, it seems. I don't think China's ever going to forgive America for that, by the way.
Prepare to show
Not even a little.
China was for a good 1,000 years the most prosperous country on the planet. It's even better here because this Great Wall has magical dragon ladies guarding it. Oh, Cathay is also near the countries of Nippon, Ind, and Koresh. Nippon is Japan, Ind is India, and Koresh is Southeast Asia. I'm not giving them their own spots because no one cares about them, and I can't bring myself to either. That's it for the non-chaotic living humans, but that doesn't mean we're done talking about humans. The next few ones just don't have a heartbeat. Or skin. These are the bad guys
yes,
in
the
Chaos
more
Theory
interesting
Warhammer.
faction.
Imagine Dracula, if you will. Now imagine Dracula if he had a 100,000 strong army of zombies, skeletons, lesser vampires, and pretty much anything else that you could find at a Spirit Halloween. The total history of the vampires stretches back thousands of years, but for the purposes of this video, we're only going to go back a few hundred. We go to a fella named Vlad von Karstein, because if you haven't caught on yet, this setting is allergic to subtlety. He showed up to the very on-the-nose Empire province of...
I mean, so is 40k. But, you know, if that's the case, I'm gonna say that's just a GW thing.
Sylvania, which was a horrible place to live. It was covered in swamps, the people were dumb and afraid of scary monsters, and because this setting is what it is, they weren't even wrong to be so. When a peasant in real life says a witch made their family ill with the plague, it's baseless superstition. When a peasant in Warhammer says that, there's a good chance they're right. When a Sylvanian peasant says that, they are right. Vlad shows up to this province, marries the daughter of the ruling noble to become its next ruler, and despite being a blood-sucking vampire, this place sucked so hard it was a marked improvement. Even better, him and his wife Isabella actually loved each other. They had vampire kids like Conrad von Karstein, who is insane and liked to twist the heads off of peasants, and Manfred von Karstein, who is the worst. Of course, this wouldn't be Warhammer if everyone was just nice and peaceful,
as his
but one
picture
day
can
Vlad had a
blatantly tell you.
brilliant idea. What if he was the Emperor? He could live forever and usher in an eternal age of prosperity, mostly for vampires, but for some of the people too. So he tried to become the Emperor. At gunpoint. Zombie point more like, but 100,000 zombies is a lot more effective than most Renaissance age guns were. He failed, but the damage was done. Him, his wife, and their children spread vampirism across the Empire. Now Sylvania is barely even considered a part of it, and everyone does their best to ignore it. This is probably a bad move, because every few decades some vampire likes to try their hand at raising a massive undead army to take over the Empire with. They all fail, but they're very murderous. Them failing means the Empire's population only drops by 20% instead of 100%. Just watch the first episode of Castlevania if you somehow haven't, for what it's like when the Midnight Aristocracy goes to war. There's a lot of vampires to choose from, though, to get your specific undead needs.
I mean, to be fair to Castlevania's Netflix adaptation, it certainly is a good show. But I feel like now that I know what I know from watching the Devil May Cry TV show, probably among a few other things, you know, Castlevania only worked because there weren't any contemporary stories that focused on that fiction to begin with outside of its mainline games. And if that is indeed the case, then I feel like, right, that the amount of love and appreciation we gave to that series is entirely dependent on whether or not the person who made it actually cared about the setting of Castlevania or cared more about their ideas for the setting, right? And, you know, like, Adi Shankar, you know, like, I don't know the guy, so I can only judge him based off of his body of work. And from what I've seen, you know, like, his Castlevania TV show helped skyrocket him into infamy and fame as well as popularity. But when it comes to his actual ability to direct and perform on other things that isn't just Castlevania, it leaves you questioning things. It leaves you wondering, like, does he actually appreciate these things, or is he just talking out of his ass? You know, like some other people who have done similar things with famous IPs. He-Man, She-Ra, anybody? Anyways, yeah, it's, I feel like, right, Netflix has this problem where the executives at the top level are fucking idiots and morons, and though they have some talented directors and people, they don't care about channeling them correctly in a way that actually warrants fan reception plus profit, as well as new consumerist fans who would be interested in the IP to begin with, as much as they're in love with their own ideas and their own ways they could possibly abuse the product, which is the stupidest fucking thing in the universe, if you ask me. The Netflix is essentially the Disney of streaming services, despite the fact that Disney themselves also has their own streaming service. They are very much the Disney of streaming services because they don't actually care about the IPs they ape off of. They just care about what they can do to twist it and turn it into something that's a little bit more palatable for modern senses, which the quote-unquote modern sensibilities is fictitious and often debatable, more often than not, because it's like, just because you can put Alucard having polyamorous sex, because you can put Alucard in a threesome with like two siblings, one of them being a dude, doesn't mean you should, right? Doesn't mean you should. I mean, the main reason why he was even included in Castlevania, the game series, in the first place, all right, was because, you know, Alucard was just a pretty face to get women more interested in the thing. It's kind of hard to think of Alucard as being a very self-respecting and very noble sort of, like, character, who's also a bit of a femboy. when he gets pegged like one. Like it's not there's no point to it. Like you maybe the idea of him being in that particular type of scenario that led to him getting chained to a bed, among other things, is not necessarily a knock on Alucard's parts entirely. Like maybe it's arguable that that female fans probably don't really give that much of a shit. But I feel like like if I was a fan of this character, right, and I was someone who really liked the character, I was someone who was who liked the character, who enjoyed the character to some degree, like was a fan in a few ways, right? I don't know how I would like the idea and the interpretation of him basically allowing himself to get chained to a bed and having, although consensual, just random casual sex with people who are supposed to be his fucking students, among other things. Like there are layers to this that need unpacking, but the point is that, like, I feel like the depictions and the ways that they handle certain characters is a bit dubious and questionable. And I feel like Alucard's character in particular probably didn't need to go in the directions that they ended up going down. But since not a whole lot of people seem to have given a shit outside of like the obvious fact that some people were kind of like had their eyebrows raised and were just like, was this necessary? No. Okay, fair enough. Like people ignored it mostly because at least the show's quality was on point, right? But now that we've seen Adi Shankar's other works and his other interpretations of certain works, like it really does bring to question the actual intent and ideas behind the man. And I really don't know if I like the idea that he's willing to take certain IPs and properties and turn them into something that is not at all like people remember them. I mean, again, Devil May Cry had a story. If he just focused on making that particular story flow better, it would have sold gangbusters. But he didn't do that. Instead, what he did was that he created an abomination that has led to Lady working for the governments, the demons becoming less interesting by making Dante and the demons less interesting by association of the fact that there are a lot more half demons than there should be, and on top of that, right. Like, they turned them into a literal political allegory for illegals. It was the dumbest fucking thing they could have done. It was the most boneheaded decision. And though some people have commented on it, it's saying that it's not a terrible idea for a story, I'm gonna fucking disagree with them on their inclusion, not just on the sheer fact that, yes, it would probably make for an interesting idea. It's certainly a pointed story to tell in this particular modern day and age. But was it handled well? No. And did it deserve to be here? No, because the setting didn't allow for it, and it was the wrong show to be having this conversation in the first place. Okay? It detracts so much from the overall lore and appeal of Devil May Cry. Again, Dante and Virgil are a rare type of sorts, because Sparta decided he was going to stand up for humanity, rebel against demonkind, and nobody else talks about other demons that did this. Only Sparta. Probably because most other demons were fucking petty. They care more about coveting their own power. And the only way to get more of that is to devour humans. And also just probably kill other demons to devour them as well. But at the end of the day, they just coveted their own power. Sparta was at the top of his game. He was the most powerful being alive. He looked at the mindless slaughter of humanity, and he's just like, either out of a weird sort of moral crisis about wanting to slaughter and butcher them wholesale, or because he didn't want other demons to essentially gain more power to overtake his. Like Sparta did make the decision to rebel against demonkind and essentially make it impossible for them to basically reap the power from the humans by killing them, like, just wholesale, and essentially divided the two worlds into different realms. And so, regardless of what your reasons are for why these things tend to happen, like, at the end of the day, I feel like Sparta, and I feel like Dante, I feel like all of these things are made lesser by the show's inclusion, because they don't care about actually making the show work for what makes for what makes the games themselves work in the first place, right? Like, the games themselves are great for what they are as is. The show did not need to overcomplicate it or even change up several different details just to make it work for a Netflix adaptation. All right, it even told the most impressive story of all, which is family drama, family issues, revenge. It told a whole lot of different motivational and interesting factors that would absolutely appeal to a wider audience. The problem, of course, is that they just decided they wanted to do it shittily that particular day and not actually bother to make it at all cool or interesting. Just because Lady works for the government and she swears up a fucking storm, that doesn't make her cool. That doesn't give her cool points. It just makes her look childish. All right? That's just a brat. And nobody takes brats seriously, despite the fact that they're woefully, competent. And that's the problem, is that she is woefully competent, probably too competent throughout the entire show, so much so that it makes all the side characters that work under her seem like a bunch of incompetent morons by comparison. All right? The fact that she does everything herself, from what I understand, and the fact that she does, that most of the things that get done is a result of her actions and not everybody else's, is a testament to this fact. All right? It's just dumb. Everything about the Netflix TV adaptation of the Devil May Cry franchise is just woefully and ill-conceived garbage, and I'm not going to change my stance on that point. And again, as far as turning demons into refugees is concerned, I think it's better to be employed in maybe a different story, or potentially and more than likely an original story, than in a Devil May Cry TV show. And though some people would argue, will argue that it is a unique artistic interpretation, a twist to the story of the franchise done specifically for the show, because the show is its own thing. It doesn't need to work in tandem and in line with the games. And my argument to that is, then you're missing the fucking point of making a TV show based off of a popular work. You're missing the point of adapting something for a new medium. You're missing the overall point here. All right? I mean, it would be no different, right, than if someone were to claim... It would be no... in fact, actually, I just remembered something even more damning. But anyways, I'm not going to touch that one yet, because this video is going to be too long. So, basically stating... I think that if your overall point of adapting something is to erode all of the things that made it good in the first place for the sake of making it quote unquote better, that ceases to become the actual work itself. It loses all of the grandeur, all of the appeal, all of the original love and soul of the work, and it becomes something else entirely. Okay? It's no longer Devil May Cry. It is Adi Shankar's Devil May Care attitude. It is the Adi Shankar Devil May Care the anime. That's basically what it turned into. It is not Devil May Cry. And I cannot argue honestly that it is Devil May Cry, other than in name only, because it has none of the things that made that story what it is. Lady did not work for the government. Lady was just a girl who got really good at killing demons and wanted to hunt down her father. She had such a hatred boner for him. So fucking bad. Actually, I should probably not say that. But she basically had the biggest raging hatred storm within herself that she had to hunt him down and had to get revenge for the murder of her mother, because that's what he did. He murdered her mother to gain more power, and also to work with demons. And in order to fulfill this revenge, she ran into Dante. She met him, climbed the 10-minute groove, faced onslaughts of demons, and had to grapple with the sense that maybe not all demons are terrible, and that maybe this one guy who looks more human than most, has a heart that is more human than most, who has demonic powers and can withstand actual brutal fatal punishments that would normally kill a man, despite the fact this guy is a literal ikemen with demonic power, she literally was just like, you know what? You know what? Fuck it, right? She came to terms with the fact that her father is gone at one point. She can't do anything to stop him at another point. Things have escalated far too great. She does not have the strength nor the ability to take on this task, but there is someone who's willing to carry that torch. And Dante was more than happy to carry this torch because he learned through Lady, right, that this is an important matter, not just to her, but for himself, because Virgil's involved, and Virgil is basically his other half, his twin brother. They stand for two very different things, and he wants to destroy humanity and the human world in order to make himself stronger as a result. And it is a story that only works because it focuses so heavily on family. And there is no better story to tell other than this particular story. And yet, for some bizarre fucking reason, the entire show, from what I understand, does not focus on any of these elements, but rather focuses on some stupid bullshit about demons, demonic refugees, and the government. That's the most that I've heard about it. That's the most people's general consensus is of it. And they've also turned Dante into a reactionary character. Well, I mean, granted, he was already a reactionary character by that point in the storyline, but they made him incompetent as a result. Like, he's not Ichigo from Bleach. He is very much like fucking, what is it? He's not Midoriya, but he's, what is it? Who's that fucking weird purple kid from My Hero? I don't even remember at this point. He's the one with the fucking hair that can stick to things. You know, like he's turned into Mineta, I think is his name. He's turned into fucking Mineta. All right. When your comparison goes from being Ichigo Kurosaki to Mineta, it's awful. All right. It's awful. Burn it down, burn it with fire, kill it with fucking a chainsaw at this point. Anyways, I went on another tangent. My apologies. You're going to get this a lot throughout this entire day. But yeah, I'll just move on.
Satisfied. The von Karsteins are the classic vampires who want to suck your blood and rule over the night. The Lamians are a vampire KGB with spy networks and pretty much...
Oh, wonderful. My connection's lagging a little bit.
Austria, probably. The lizards don't take kindly to that sort of thing. The Strigoi are what happens if your average Florida resident became a vampire, the Necrox are evil wizards, and the Blood Dragons are a heavy metal album cover. If you thought it was kick-ass when Dracula sent the forces of hell to wreak havoc on the living, you'll love the vampire counts. But I did mention that some of the undead don't have skin, and vampires usually have that at least. For those fellas, we need to go further south.
Tomb Kings.
Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt. You now understand the basics of the Tomb Kings. Once upon a time, thousands of years in the past, the lands of Nehekara were prosperous.
I mean, to be fair to the vampires in that explanation, they definitely, it seems very interesting, right, that there are vampires native to this setting that actually have their own faction and power outside of just like, they're just a monster of the week type of thing. They're just an occasional occurrence that just turns out to be an inconvenience for humanity and an abomination, among other things, right? It's interesting that they have their own faction and they have their own society that they openly like work with. And it's an interesting thing to witness because most settings don't even do that. They don't even go that far. They don't give vampires that level of power. I once wanted to do something like that. I once wrote a story, right, that was going to put the vampires with their own secret society. They were going to have their own secret society in the middle of some underground butt fuck nowhere type of area that people would hear of but would never actually know the location of. And it's not a network of tunnels. No. It is a secret cavern beneath somewhere. Not even the vampires themselves would know it. And it's basically a cave system that exists almost, it's like a well of sorts, right? It's like a water well, an underground well that's large in diameter, has an entire city built around it, and the only way to enter it is by teleporting into it. And that's how I was going to basically structure that vampire society. And then all of the vampires that you would meet throughout that particular setting would be of nobility, and they would be not nobility of the sense of like, oh, well, they're clearly like the nobles of like certain like of politicians or of different countries. No, no, no. There's, some of them do masquerade as such, but most of them are just isolated, right? They're just isolated. They're away from human society, and they only ever allow themselves to be known, or they only ever go out only to find humans worth abducting or experimenting on to further their own particular sort of ventures and research, right? Which is where their nobility comes from. They're only noble in accordance to their own societies rather than what is established by humanity. And that is how I was going to work with it. That's how I was going to frame it in a story that I was making. But, you know, that I never told that story. So there's that. One of these days, maybe I should tell that story. Maybe one of these days I should write that story, because I had so many ideas going for it that it's honestly would be a shame if I didn't do something with it. But I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, as far as vampire societies go, I love the vampire society of this one because it's an actual vampire society. It's one built and predicated by vampires. I would love to see this done in other fictions because I think vampires are interesting. Where they're not Twilight vampires, but I think that they're interesting. And I would love to see more works around them. But yeah, I digress.
They had regular contact with their gods, magical constructs to defend themselves with, and when they had a good king like Cetra, they would sometimes go on to conquer half the world. Then a fella named Nagash was born. He's awful. This man was a monster through and through. He's really smart, though. Smart enough to capture dark elves and force them to teach him dark magic, which usually humans can't do. Smart enough to invent necromancy with what he learned. Smart enough to overthrow his brother, the king, and take over most of the land with his undead forces. And he's also quite powerful with his magic. He was eventually overthrown and cast into the desert where he died, but he invented necromancy. Death is a suggestion for him, such is his power. When he inevitably came back,
So necromancy was developed by these Egyptian spin-offs? That's interesting.
he discovered someone had stolen his research notes and used them.
You know, it seems pretty apt
He made
for...
those vampires as generals, and no, they didn't have a choice in the matter, and then decided ruling just Nehekara with undead wasn't enough. So he formed a plan to kill everyone in the region at once, resurrect every corpse on the planet, and take over the world with his World War Z undead army. Part 1 of the plan went off without a hitch. It was only through the intervention of the Skaven, who I promise you will love, and the last living dude in the region, which kept most of Part 2 from happening. Then everyone in Nehekara promptly stood back up, realized their hearts were no longer beating, but they were still standing, and things got messy. Imagine Game of Thrones before it became horrible, with all the political fighting over who gets to be king. Now imagine Game of Thrones if every single person who was ever the rightful king was now alive at the same time fighting over what was their throne. Not they believed it to be their throne, or they wanted it to be their throne, it was the throne they sat on once upon a time.
That's fucking wild to think about. Bringing back all of the previously the previously dead to become undead, and now they suddenly rise up and they're like, wait, this is my throne. No, this is my throne. No, I sat on this throne. Well, so did I. Well, I have a right to rule it because I'm the one who brought this to the to the entirety of this land and culture. Well, no, I did this, so that invalidates all of your things that you've done. And it just, imagine how petty this must be. And if I remember correctly, I said that these people were very petty at one point. And then we got to the dwarves, which basically took the cake for the pettiest of the petty, if I remember correctly.
And also they can respawn. And also, most common people were mindless undead skeletons who had the flesh flayed from their bones with the desert winds and could only follow basic orders, like kill that guy who thinks he's the real king. This does not a stable nation make. Luckily, the priest woke up that Cetra guy, who cock-slapped everyone until they started behaving again. Now the Toon Kings no longer have skin, have no clear path to achieve immortal bodies to feel with again that they so crave, and no longer have the backing of their very gods. Fortunately for them, death is more of a suggestion. They can still use magic, even if not quite as good as it was when the gods were helping, and they now have eternity to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't involve some sort of physical sensation. Sometimes they still fight amongst each other, sometimes they spend their newfound immortality pursuing whatever hobbies they want, and sometimes they sail all the way from Egypt to Sweden and burn half of it to the ground because someone stole their hat. And on the rarest of occasions, a tomb queen will tell a strapping young lad that if they still had functional genitals, she'd fuck him so hard the experience would kill him. They're very fun. They're true neutral to the core. Some of them want conquest, some of them just want to find new hobbies, some hate the living.
I mean, Cleopatra was a thing, and I feel like that was probably apt. It was maybe appropriate. That's probably that's probably a funny thing to include knowing the history, right? I mean, Cleopatra was a femme fatale of the truest sense of the word. Like, she not only had power, but she knew how to wield it, and she also had her femininity, which is also just as damning of a power as anything else. Like, she had a natural law of attraction on her side, and so what did she do with it? She did the thing that most women did, even especially back in the day, which is that she leveraged it to basically turn one of the, I think it was a general from Sparta, into being her personal simp. And so he basically, right, was just all about this broad until the day he died. And I believe Cleopatra and him died from poisoning or some shit. I don't even remember. But I don't even think that it was actually clear as to how Cleopatra died, but it's a whole bit, right? It's that I don't remember too much of the story. I've seen it referenced in other fictions, but I do find that Cleopatra's story to be an interesting one because it's a real actual story about a real woman that ruled over an impressive kingdom and culture and used it to the fullest extent of the term and managed to do all of that without being usurped, among other things. She probably had other issues, a lot of issues that I probably have never heard of or probably am just completely glossing over. But it's like, like, it's impressive that a woman was at one point in time, like a pharaoh and was leading a nation of people and was able to obtain allies and constituents by both utilizing her brain and her brawn, her actual fucking physical form to do it. Like, she's only as great and is often remembered and often referenced because her rule was that interesting. Like, she leveraged everything to get the things that she wanted, not just for herself, but likely for her people. And even if it was selfishly motivated, it helped to basically do a lot for, like, for Egypt, for the, what was it? Was she Persia? I don't even remember now. Was it Persia or was it? I'm pretty sure they're probably different though. You know what? I don't know. I don't need to. My ignorance is showing. But the point is that there is a lot of interesting takeaways and similes that we can make about certain fictions, and one of the funniest ones is thinking about history and wondering just how, on what level is history referenced in certain fictions. And it's not just someone just being like, you know what, I know this particular thing about this particular culture. I'm just going to roll with that and just lean a little bit heavier into it.
Out of jealousy, some don't care either way as long as they serve, and some go out of their way to find human members to recruit for their court because it reminds them of what they've lost. If you can think of a motivation, there's a Tomb King that has it. It's a very simple thing to know if the Tomb Kings are for you or not. Do you like the Mummy? Do you like ancient Egypt? Have you ever wondered what it'd be like if the Sphinx came to life and started crushing people like Godzilla? Tomb Kings are perfect for you then. And hey, look at that. They're the other
that's pretty fucking wild.
The old world. Now you can get into fantasy proper without people like me dismissively calling you a horse molester. So now we can leave this region of the world and indeed humanity, and I have forgotten 4 human nations that deserve at least a little bit of credit. Shit. Tylea is Italy during medieval/Renaissance times, so it's thousands of city-states smushed into one country. It's right next to the Skaven capital. There are worse places to live. Estalia is Spain without the colonial empire. Both of these places say they're the first civilized nation in the Old World, which the Empire disputes. The Border Princes are the land of whatever the hell you want it to be. It is an excuse to make your own homebrew army, and they fight orcs more than anything. Most of the people there are either fleeing from the Empire, leaving the Empire in a futile attempt to make it big, and petty nobles. Araby is exactly what you think it is. Turn Aladdin into a wargame faction, but only a background faction. And if you think that's me being dismissive of it, do please read about Sultan Jafar's military campaign against the Old World. It's actually got advanced medicine, science, and magical practices and theories, but I can guarantee the only thing you're going to remember about this place is Sultan Jafar. We're going to start by clumping all the elves together, because their backstories are all very interconnected. Don't worry, they'll each get their own time to shine. Once upon a time, there were just elves. The first species created by the Old Ones to fight chaos, they were made to be elves. Arrogant, long-lived, and short of the Slann, they're the best wizards around. Then chaos descended, the old ones pissed off, and the elves had no idea what the hell to do. Eventually, a cool elf named Kalidor made a magical vortex, the chief cool elf Anarion grabbed a cursed sword that killed a whole lot of demons, and then everything cooled down a bit. Anarion disappeared, but they elected a new king, so all was okay. His children with his first wife even showed back up to be a bloodline of legendary heroes, though they're also cursed because of that sword. Then Anarion's second wife told their son Malekith that he should be king, convinced him with her boobs because family trees can be shaped like Christmas wreaths if you don't mind being a freak, and a civil war broke out. Malekith walked into a sacred fire to prove his worth, whereupon their chief god lit him on fire. Him and his mother kept trying to take over the home continent of Ulthuan. They nearly unmade it when they realized they couldn't, and then the newly formed Dark Elves were forced off of it to go live in Canada. The High Elves, those
To go live in Canada. I mean, the Dark Elves in particular are an interesting faction, simply because they're fucked up, but they're not as fucked up as like the obvious futuristic grimdark fantasy that the fucking Drukhari are based off of. But they're very much on a similar level. They're just evil, and they're also kind of petty. Like they're just like the pettiness is there, but it's mostly just political backstabbing turmoil among other things. It's all just it's more so just what do they call it? Selfishness. It's a combination of selfishness and some, what is it? It's just avarice. It's avariceness. It's just, if that's even a word, it's just avarice incarnate. It is greed, it is lust, it is a lot of things. There's a lot of motivations that play into the Dark Elf Society from what I remember of the initial reaction of it, and that is fascinating. And it's only fascinating, right? Because they're elves, right? They were once just normal elves, and now they're again, just like the Drukhari, they're shadows of their former selves. It's like, but it's only more controlled and more contained within the fact that their government operates and functions just purely off of just wanting to stab each other in the back, coveting more power, and doing whatever political shenanigan to do it.
who stayed behind once again got to rebuild the
rather than
remnants of their home.
the creepy shit in 40K.
Friendship with the dwarfs, that's a good thing. Oh wait, that got ruined too. But don't feel too bad, the High Elf King ruined that one for them himself by being the worst. That one wasn't an unfortunate tragedy, it was a self-imposed unfortunate tragedy. The dwarfs and the High Elves fought fantasy World War I, and it was pretty miserable for everyone involved. Picking a victor is sort of meaningless because both groups were pretty thoroughly wrecked by the event, and the High Elves had to return home when the Dark Elves began the first of many invasion attempts to retake Ulthuan. Some High Elves didn't go home and sheltered in a magical forest called Athel Loren instead. Now we have our third group of elves, the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves are the easiest of the subgroups to explain. They sit in their magical forest and are insane. Sometimes people walk into the magical forest. It's safe to assume that unless stated,
I mean, they're just Bosmer or Romulans. They're just wood people. They are Fey folk. That's just all they are.
otherwise, they do not come back out of the magical forest.
They get up to some freaky shit, I imagine.
Out of the magical forest, you find that 1,000 years have passed since you entered, and every single one of those years catches up with you as you age to dust within minutes. Aside from that, though, your first instinct might be that these are stupid, uninspired, lame D&D Wood Elves who love nature and harmony and trees. And in fairness, they do love all those things. It's just that these trees are 50 feet tall, mobile, have a craving for the suffering of mankind, and the Wood Elves will invite peasants to feasts to fatten them up for the forest spirits. They don't give a rat's ass about the outside world aside from how it might affect their perfect little lives inside the forest. There are a few scattered enclaves of them across the world that are a bit friendlier, but the general motivation of the Wood Elves is getting other people to get the hell off of their lawn. And when the lawn can come to life and devour you alive, it's a pretty easy task to do that. They also gaslight the Bretonnians into thinking their goddess is an elf one, although as it turns out later on, the extent of the elven gaslighting goes even further beyond their understanding. They're led by the avatars of two of the elf gods, naturally the ones that are focused on nature, because Wood Elf. The king likes to rampage across Bretonnia every now and again for funsies, and the queen sometimes says don't do that, sometimes doesn't care, and sometimes encourages it when she's in a feisty mood. They're not my thing, truth be told, but I can respect the idea of wanting to be left alone for all eternity.
That sounds very naturalistic to me, and it sounds very animalistic too. It's all whimsy, as nature is. Nature's always been whimsy. You know, you live or you die. It's the only thing that matters.
So if you too cringe inside a little bit whenever you get a text message or a Discord DM, these guys might be for you. The High Elves are the ones that stayed on Ultuan and remained much the same throughout. And like I said, the old ones sure as hell made them to be elves. Long-lived, magical, arrogant, and because they live for thousands of years, they're real good at what they do. Some of their swordsmen have been practicing for so long that they take into account the weight of their eyelashes when they swing. You're not beating that. And sure enough, the history of the High Elves is the history of them sailing out from their homeland to go stop most of the problems the world faces. They taught humanity how to use magic properly, they keep excess magic from saturating the world, and they have a habit of showing up just as they're needed to stop things from getting completely out of hand. There's a High Elf who destroyed orc warbands that have been rampaging since the dawn of time and was so good at it that he gave the entire elven race a reputation amongst the greenskins for being good fighters. All of this because a fat goblin burned down his house. And of course, Teclis, my beloved. Is there a 10,000 strong army of orcs, dark elves, or worse bearing down on you? Well, with a wave of his staff and a flick of his wrist, there is now a new crater. He's a real cool guy like that, and he's not even that arrogant. The flip side to balance this glazing session I've just done is that they do actually have weaknesses to go along with all that. They reproduce slowly, and in a wargame setting, that's the mark of death.
I mean, to be fair, they do reproduce slowly at 40k, but I don't think... Because it's... The way I understand Total War, at least, is that it's basically like a sim. It's very much a war simulator, whereas 40k is just a tabletop game that focuses on faction versus faction rather than the actual commerce and the other aspects that in resource managing that will go into that. You know, it's very much just war versus like units against the other units, which. That being said, you know, like, I can understand why this in particular might be a bit more of a sticking point than it is in, say, 40k, but I do feel that the reproducing slowly aspect of it is a challenge that's uniquely suited for those who know how to balance their needing to recoup the losses, as well as the cost of certain issues of losing units in war, among other things, right? It adds a layer of challenge that I think a lot of strategy enthusiasts might find to be interesting or compelling.
Every death in battle is a hindrance, although at least compared to 40k, they aren't outright dying. They're on the watch list for being endangered rather than being endangered outright. And magic being so innate to them means that when something with it goes wrong, they feel it and are affected by it more acutely than most. Like when their magical queen is sad. Their entire homeland's climate is tied to her emotions, and like any living being that isn't a psychopath, she is sad when a great amount of her people die. So when Malekith decides today is as good a day as any to get 1 million people killed trying to retake his homeland again, it really sucks to live in the same country as her. They're also physically frail, which isn't the biggest weakness in the world, but you'll definitely notice it when an orc is bearing down on them. They've also got a bit of a species-wide depression thing going on too. When you live functionally forever, you get a long time to get a real feel for what the world is like. And as it turns out, this world kinda sucks. They just don't have time to recuperate from any of their constant losses. The world is in danger, the High Elves sail out to fix the issue, and then the world is immediately in danger again. Add on to that some more standard elven weaknesses, like their old age, meaning they don't always adapt to...
Well, I mean, have you seen how many factions there are in this goddamn world? There's so many problems that you have to contend with on a daily basis that it's got to be mind-numbing to have to stop and really think about. I mean, like, as an elf who's probably lived for even 100 years, you probably have encountered, on some level, right, Skavens, humans, dwarves, and you know all the histories of their cultures and what led to their discoveries, among other things, like you probably have a vague idea of how other factions work, how other races work, as well as how your own people works. Since there are other elves in this universe, they're very intimately connected on how those other people and factions work, I'm sure. And so when you really look at the grand scheme of things, if you let I'm sure if the elves, when they get the chance to, when they sit down and really think about and ruminate all of the experiences they've ever had, they probably come to the strangest and most ungodly conclusion, right? That this world is just fucked. Everything's just fucked up. And there's no fixing it. There's just no way around it. You know, like they probably feel it very acutely, which is probably why, you know, they're what led to the inspiration as to why they're so touchy-feely in the 40k version with the Eldar. But yeah.
To new things well, and you've got a race that has a bit of a deadline attached to it. Mankind is inventing guns, tanks, and more, and the elves think the bow and arrow remains the height of warfare. To their credit, though, they're damn good with that bow and arrow, especially when it's a magical lightsaber bow and arrow.
I mean, to be fair, they probably would value grace and skill above all others. Technological advancement be damned.
And dragons. The High Elves are best friends of almost every dragon that isn't from Cathay. Dragons are scary in a fight, and let's be honest with ourselves. If a dragon declared your hometown to be the best thing ever and made sure to always visit and help out when it was in trouble, you'd have an ego the size of Mount Everest too. Overall, if you like elves, you'll like these guys. Even if you don't like elves or only associate Warhammer's elves with the Eldar, the High Elves' ability to actually put their money where their mouth is might win you over. And if nothing else, there's an elf character named Aletha Nar who skins Dark Elves alive because he just hates them that much, and is overall Michael Myers if he had pointy ears and Special Forces training. Hard to get more unelven than that guy. Speaking of ego, though...
I mean, I'm sure they're all small racists in their own way.
Or if you're not a big fan of the race, elven racism. Now jack it up to the logical extreme endpoint of the concept so that they don't only think they're the best, they think of all other races as vermin that should either serve them as slaves, be hunted for sport, or outright eradicated. Welcome to Nagaroth, friends. It only goes downhill from there. Warhammer North America sucks. It's home to the Dark Elves after they got kicked out of their old home, and the entire thing is either a frozen hellhole...
You think that'd be South America. It was the southern states that wanted to enslave everything.
Inside of this place. Do you think anyone that lives here is gonna be nice? Sure enough, the Dark Elves aren't nice. There used to be some human tribes that lived in Nagaroth, and then the Dark Elves killed or enslaved them all. They have cities built into mountains they use as ships to raid and enslave others, they kidnapped High Elf children to raise as Dark Elves, and the entire society looks like what would happen if every single Decepticon was Starscream. Murder and treachery are only illegal if you get caught, and if you're powerful enough, not even then. They're led by Malekith and his mother Marathi, the same two elves who formed the Dark Elves 10,000 years prior. Marathi's kind of just always awful, but sometimes if you squint real hard, Malekith can almost sort of a little bit resemble a noble elf hero he once was. Then he does things like instituting the elven god of murder as the head of the Dark Elf pantheon, uses demons as auxiliaries when he invades Ulthuan, and starts the Warhammer Fantasy Triangle slave trade. In spite of failing to retake Ulthuan every time he tries, he's a damn powerful wizard and warrior both. He's just Darth Vader, actually. He's even got the suit of armor that helps keep him alive because he was severely burned. And who can forget his mommy issues? Although I don't think Anakin ever piped his mother, so a little bit different there.
When I heard that one the first time, that one was fucking wild. Fucking god. But yeah, he does sound like Darth Vader. He's just, yeah. It's, weird, interesting similarities aside, you know, like, he also reminds me, both design and uniquely, as the character from Overlord, who you play as to send your minions out to essentially fuck up shit. Which, you know, by the way, I don't remember who the studio is who makes those games, or used to, but when's the next Overlord game? And also, why would it be just the absolute worst? Not in the sense that it's awful, the gameplay's awful, why would you design it this way? No. I'm talking about the absolute worst, as in, like, why can't we do the most crazy, gnarliest, evil shit and be able to get away with that? Like, why can't we do that? Like, it's a... Overlord could do that from the first game to the second game on varying levels, but generally speaking, you could do some pretty evil shit right? But it was very much like tame evil. Like it wasn't full sail, just straight up like petty, selfish evil with a hint of treachery. No, no, no. It was the evil I'm talking about is just straight up wholesale. I'm just gonna slaughter people for no reason. Actually, now that I think about it, they do have that. Actually, now that I think about it, they do have some things that are interesting to dissect. But the point is that where's the next Overlord game? Why isn't it here? Why isn't there? Why haven't we gotten another mainline Overlord title in like forever? I get that maybe there's a few people, a few publishers who probably wouldn't want to publish the damn thing because of obvious implications of the fact that you're playing the villain of a story instead of the hero is obvious. But again, like the appeal of Overlord was that you can choose to be a bit less of a dickhead when you played as the Overlord. Like you play as a guy who can either rule with an iron fist or is just a murder hobo. Like it's not, there is no ifs, ands, or buts around it. It's like there's different flavors of evil here, and you just need to focus on which one you want the player to really work with. And even then, if we're working optimally here, give them all of the flavors and just let them choose what kind of Overlord they want to be wholesale. Like it's as simple as that. Like the whole. I think if you were to bring back the Overlord games, like especially now, especially at the height of like the return of like the modern gaming and conventions and writing that we're seeing making a return nowadays, which is like all these male-focused particular type of action games that focus on violence, gratuitous slaughter, with a hint of like, if not just outright philosophical, just like what is it? If not just outright, right? Just like, like we understand the game that's being played here. We understand the score. Like we're going to become all about this thing. We're going to do this for the Emperor, for democracy. Like if it, like if it's, how do I put this? At the height of this game, at the height of this trend, right? Overlord gets announced. Overlord hits the market. And it immediately gains fucking success and notoriety because you could do a bunch of crazy shit in the games that you just don't get to see anymore in most AAA games now, as well as some indies. Like I think Overlord would absolutely be great if it were to come back. Like I think that in the right hands, Overlord 3 potentially could be a real game changer, especially if we're talking like, the Pikmin like strategy type-esque fighting game. Well, I'm going to say fighting game, but definitely the Pikmin-esque strategy type game mechanics that the series is known for. And I think it would just be an interesting thing to witness. I think a modern Overlord game would absolutely, not the modern Overlord game, but definitely a Overlord 3 as sequel, one that takes all of the graphical enhancements and gameplay conventions that we have now, just all rounded down to create the best Overlord experience, would be an absolute banger of a game. Like, I don't want to just be Sauron. I want to be my own Sauron. I don't just want to feel the Sauron. I want to be the Sauron, right? I want to color my own Sauron-like existence, and if that means murder and slaughter wholesale across all the wide different nations and leave nothing but darkness in my wake, then God damn it, let it be so. Right? There's like I know that some people, right, are just like there's like a whole moral outrage about games, about certain games, especially games like this, right, where it's just like, oh, the whole point is to be evil. That's kind of fucked up, right? But the interesting thing is that, well, yeah, it's fucked up. But, you can't morally grandstand either, because I'm sure you've probably thought about maybe wanting to potentially hurt someone who's probably giving you a bad time at one point in your life. You probably had thoughts about doing something similar. You probably are a woman who sits alone in her house all day with 10 cats watching murder documentaries in her spare time, if not reading the most trashiest smut that has ever smutted onto the pages of some fucking book somewhere, and you're entirely okay with it because, god damn it, you need to get your rocks off somehow. And you know what? I'm not going to take that away from you. I'm not going to take anything away from you. Men have two natural proclivities, murder and sex. All right, you take away those two things, what do you get? What's the basic core of it all? It's just domination. Why do we gravitate towards domination? Why do we gravitate towards control? Why do we gravitate towards specific stimuli so heavily? Such petty motivations, such trivial petty motivations. The interesting question is obvious. It's because that is how we're neurologically designed that way, and god damn it, sometimes daddy does need to get his fucking rocks off. Sometimes he needs to vent his frustrations, and if that means he has to do that by blowing people's heads off in a video game, chopping them up, or turning them into mincemeat, then god damn it, let him have his game. Let him have his moment of just being a disgusting piece of shit. Because the alternative, right, is that if people didn't have these outlets, there'd probably be a lot more disgusting pieces of shit in the world, and I don't think that's an issue and a question we want to really debate as so much. We just want to just accept the fact that, yes, people like this probably can and probably would exist if we probably took away these things wholesale, and they probably would exist a lot more. And though it might be debatable, because the question of right and wrong and choosing whether or not to be that person is always a subject and a matter of debate. I do think, right, that people are conditioned to be who they are based off of their environment, things they're exposed to growing up, among other things. I do think there's a lot of contributing factors, but I don't think we want to really delve into the idea and experiment with the possibility of what would happen if we took away these violent mediums away, as well as the sexual ones, because then the obvious problem, of course, of taking these things away for the sake of moral outrage and ethics would probably inspire a lot of problems. And even if we agree that there probably wouldn't be that big of a huge tick in just rampant crime and violence, I don't want to play the game of wanting to put that as a debate subject or even see it happen in real life. So, yeah, overall, my overall point, it's all entertainment. We play games for the purposes of catharsis, for the feeling of being able to entertain ourselves, for the feeling of being able to express parts of ourselves that are both good and kind in nature, and sometimes whimsy in that sense, but also some of the pettiest, most ridiculous, some of the most fucked up things we could ever conceive and we could ever do, and just do it for the fuck of it, right? Just do it for the sake of doing it, just because for that one particular instance, it just seems like it would be really, really nice to be able to just punch that reporter in the face. Just punch the reporter in the face, the journalist, because that person asks the most annoying questions that you frankly do not deserve to be asked. They're gonna twist it, Shepard. Just do it. Just punch the reporter in the face. She's wasting your time. Just fucking do it. There's a lot of funny things to take away from this little tangent, but the whole overall point, the overall shtick, is that I think an Overlord sequel would be great. I think it would do great, and I think that now more than anything else, I think we need another Overlord sequel, because people are becoming more delusioned, more desensitized, and more annoyed with life as is. I think we need something that channels all of those frustrations into something that is so glorified, not necessarily glorified, I guess, but more so just it's just done for the sake of shits and giggles, all right? And Overlord never took itself that seriously, by the way. It was a story very much a parody of standard fantasy tropes like Lord of the Rings, taken to the extreme, and none of it was ever meant to be taken that seriously. The humans are just dumbasses. They are just the stupid pauper peddlers of The Witcher 3, for example. And the elves are just holier than thou, so noble that they basically put themselves in a position of being put into doing stupid shits because, they decided they wanted to be Gandhi for a day or something. Like, they put themselves so high and above all other races and all other people, they think they're capable of doing anything, taken to the extreme. And then we have dwarves, we have halflings, we have all these other things in Overlord. I think we can they're just extreme caricatures of what the races actually are, and I would just love to see that brought back in some fashion and just have the ability to take them all down a peg. It would be a sweet, sweet, amazing experience. We just won't get it. We just won't get it unless it's ending, in my personal opinion. But yeah. Where's the Overlord 3 sequel? I would love to see that come back. Moving on.
There is no height of cruelty that Dark Elves don't aspire to. Acting nice gets you killed because it clearly means you're weak. Admitting you're a bit tired or injured gets you killed because if you were strong, you wouldn't be injured, so clearly you're weak and someone else more fitting should take your spot. They don't have as many dragon allies, and the ones they do are corrupted by dark magic, so they just grab whatever monstrosity they can find in the Midwest and put it in chains until it's time for battle. Much like their cousins in space, if you find you're about to be captured by them, it's probably best to just off yourself. They may not have quite as exotic measures of torturing you, but they make up for it with a real go-getter attitude in the field of human rights violations. There's a holiday called Blood Night. The cult of the god of murder goes around and kidnaps people to murder. They steal elven girls to be trained as witch elves like them, and they throw elven boys in a cauldron of boiling blood. If they survive, they get trained as an assassin. I don't think a concrete statistic has ever been given, but you can assume that not many people survive this. If you like being edgy, either ironically or because you think suffering is inherently deep, you'll like the Druchii. I can already feel the viewer retention going down, though, from how long I've been talking about elves, so how about we move to their polar opposites?
Dwarves.
Elves are posh, regal, and always at least a little bit uptight. Dwarfs are brash, to the point, and consider sobriety a sin. While the elves of Warhammer have a few things that make them stand out a bit from the standard elf template, the dwarfs of Warhammer could fit in just about any setting with minimal issue. They like drinking, they like mining, they hate orcs, and getting them to compliment non-dwarf craftsmanship is like pulling teeth from an orc. They hate magic both because it's weird elf nonsense and because when the old ones made the dwarves, they made them so opposed to magic their mere presence makes it not work properly. They love mining and mountains because that's just what dwarfs love. They do have three things that make them stand out, though. First is that it's pronounced dwarfs, not dwarves. Second is that these dwarfs are industrious little fellas. They've discovered oil and how to use it, and with it make helicopters, trains, and more. While humanity has galleons with cannons and the elves have either magical dragon ships or city-sized slave ships, the dwarfs have ironclads, submarines, and aircraft carriers. They hate using them because no proper dwarf would ever be happy with anything but solid earth under their feet, but they have them. They're slow to change to the point that anything less than 500 years old gets you complained at if you suggest using it, but at least some of them understand that the 20-barreled artillery piece is nice to have even if their ancestors might not approve. The second is that these dwarfs are the embodiment of the word spite. They're bitter that the other races won't just conform to proper dwarf ways. They hate orcs and goblins for ruining their once great cities. They hate the elves for that war they got into thousands of years ago. A war that ultimately started, mind you, because the dwarf diplomat forcibly had his beard shaved. There were some other factors leading up to it, but that was the final straw. The average dwarf doesn't know about the lizardmen much, but they'd certainly hate them too if they knew the Slann were involved in shifting some mountain ranges around that destroyed a whole lot of dwarf holds. Have you ever wronged a dwarf? Into the book you go. The Great Book of Grudges, that is. Every single thing that has in some way wronged the dwarf race is put down in there. Most dwarf holds have their own personal ones for slight against them in particular. Some dwarfs have their own personal book. Even if they don't, they have photographic memory. If you've wronged them, they'll remember. It doesn't even need to be on purpose. A human town once shorted the dwarfs 2 coins by accident in exchange for some construction work. The dwarfs sent an army and killed everyone in it. If this happens to you and you try to seek some sort of retribution for this insane idea of compensation they seem to have, you're going back in the book for any harm you might cause doing it. They will spend centuries and entire military campaigns fighting wars to right grudges, and naturally anything that happens to them during these campaigns leads to more grudges, which leads to them trying to right those grudges, which causes more grudges. You know that saying about digging 2 holes when you set out for revenge? 2 holes is not nearly enough.
Again, it's another problem of it's like the old saying, an eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. This is also just another example of a death from 1,000 cuts, because it's literally just like you're just adding more problems on top of a mountain of problems that are already there, and it's just a mountain of problems that you're creating because of this one particular grievance, or multiple grievances they might have, spawning and turning into even more grievances, All right, it's kind of like the Hydra. You're cutting off one head of a serpent just to create 10, 20 more. It's dumb, but I'll give the dwarves that. I'll give the dwarves something, like their ability and pension for being the absolute worst is certainly something that is worth admiring and being in fear of. It is holy crap, It's like you don't want to cross a dwarf at all, knowing this, but it's like, like if you just so happen to accidentally do it, that's a scenario I don't think anybody wants to consider. It must be just absolutely infuriating, goddamn insufferable, just to have to make negotiations with the dwarves at some point, right? Because it must just be just the most stifling thing you'd ever have to do. Because like they were already a traditionalist people to begin with. It's another thing when they're so fucking petty that they'll go to war with you for just the slightest of grievance, right? Oh, you shorted me by 2 coins or even a single? Congratulations, we're slaughtering your entire country. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Enough for the Dowie. And who could forget the Slayers? Let's say you're a dwarf, and you committed some seriously dishonorable action. Maybe your negligence led to other dwarfs getting killed. Maybe you fled at the height of a battle. Or maybe you just lost a bit too much money on a bet, or had your beard shaved against your will. In any of those cases, there's only one option available to you. Kill yourself. Take the Slayer oath and die in battle. There's no redeeming yourself in any way but death. There's funerals held for those who take the Slayer oath before they even leave to find something to kill them, because for all intents and purposes, they've died and the message just hasn't gone through to them yet. If you want some great books that explore Slayers, dwarfs, and the Warhammer world, read Gotrek and Felix. Read Gotrek and Felix anyway. Do it. Now. While the dwarves certainly have their work cut out for them, they've got some good stuff that makes them cool regardless. They can't use magic like wizards, so instead they grab it by the balls and hit it with a hammer until it works perfectly how they want it to with their runes. The longer their beards are, the more respected they are, and there's even a military unit called Longbeards. If their beard can touch the floor, they get equipped with some of the best armor dwarf money can buy. They've got the finest weapons in the setting, the finest armor in the setting, and while they may be slow as all hell, if they catch you, it's game over. If you like facial chair, hate change, and despise other people for being different, take a look at the dwarfs. Imagine dwarfs without that silly grudge ideology. You've committed a wrong and have to make up for it, but you can right it without causing your own death. And what's more, you can properly use magic. Fireball and lightning and all those other lovely spells you can think of. Without the shackles of tradition or even their own biology holding them back, they can produce wonders of both magic and industry. Unfortunately, they replace stupid grudges with one of the most horrific slaver cultures around, and they forego tradition to worship actual demons and dark gods. And being able to use magic isn't necessarily a good thing, because it eventually turns them into stone statues. These are the Chaos Dwarfs, and they're horrifying in a way the more human followers of Chaos can only dream of being. Saying they take the best of the dwarfs is sort of overstating it, because the best of the dwarfs is their willingness to stand by both the letter and spirit of their word. They'll have your back no matter what. Plus, while their incredible stubbornness does hold them back from a lot of progress they can make and gets them into some stupid conflicts, it also means they're not only going to accomplish whatever they set out to do, but always stand by your side. If the dwarfs say they're going to help you, they're going to help you. And if a human, dwarf, and elf are all fighting together, the dwarf is going to be the last one to break. The Chaos Dwarves take these traits and have molded them in a way that is best suited to being an evil bastard. The craftsmanship of the dwarves makes weapons, yes, but also architectural wonders and genuine pieces of art.
I mean, nobody ever said dwarves weren't sturdy.
Hell factories that are 2,000% efficient and make the most brutal weapons Chaos has to offer. They take the runic magic of the dwarfs and use it to bind demons into their weapons and armor. The demons aren't happy with this, but the Chaos Dwarfs are still dwarfs. They're so good at what they do that more often than not, the demons are powerless once the dwarfs get their hands on them. They aren't numerous, and they aren't even terribly expansionist, but when the Chaos Dwarfs do go to war, there's nothing that can truly equal it. The finest weapons and armor just like the dwarfs, only now bolstered with the power of Hellspawn. They even have the closest thing to a nice chaos god to worship, which give them all sorts of benefits. Hashut. Sure, he's called the Father of Darkness and is the god of tyranny and is overall exactly as evil as you'd expect from that, but he doesn't screw the dwarfs over. They want power, he likes it when tyrants are in power, so in exchange for them using their dwarf talents to enslave others, he gives them power. The most commonly seen use of Chaos Dwarfs is as artillery crewmen for the Hell Cannon unit, as well as frequently selling Chaos Lord's weapons and armor. This is because of both their isolationist nature and because they don't really have an army. They do have legacy rules for the old world, and they have had an army, unlike Cathay, but their status as properly playable is a bit all over the place. Still though, if you don't mind legacy rules and finding either old minis or third-party ones to use, you can feel the Chaos Dwarf army. So if you like the dwarfs but wish they were horrendous in every way possible, check out the Chaos Dwarfs. Just get used to people calling them chorfs. Not the most dignified nickname, that one. The ogres were the last race the old ones made before pissing.
It really does make you wonder why these particular dwarves don't actually become like. Is there a particular reason why no one's actually worked with these particular dwarves? Is it because they're just that unhinged, or is it just because because they're selfish, they're so selfishly motivated, they only care about their own self-interest? Like, what's because if they're this good at taking demons, creating mechanized demon machines, and among other things, right? Like, you think more Chaos factions would be interested in wanting to recruit them, but I guess there are definitely some type of reasons as to why that wouldn't be a thing. And if they're as selfish as I'm thinking that they are, they're probably, a lot of it is just self-motivated.
Off. They're resistant to chaos, tough unlike the elves, capable of changing things up quickly unlike the dwarfs, and are as ambitious and fluid as mankind. Unfortunately, the older ones couldn't quite get them to stop eating everything in sight, and never properly finished them before they left, or their homelands for that matter. When chaos invaded, the ogres were left unfinished in this state, and many became nomadic after they ate everything in whatever their first homeland was.
These are the people he calls the Walmart
shoppers.
shoppers.
Giants, who were a whole lot smarter, wiser, and powerful than the inbred alcoholic morons that giants are in Warhammer today. Things were made worse for them when they decided to migrate into Cathay, because the Dragon Emperor dropped a meteor on their homeland and blew it up. Now they had nowhere to return to, were still really hungry, and that meteor made a big hole called the Great Maw. It's a big hole in the ground with teeth, and the ogres throw food and people into it to get magical powers. They also worship a volcano and drink its lava to get fire magic. Neither of the past two sentences were made up by me. I love this setting. They're vaguely based on Mongolia.
That's crazy.
But I don't think Genghis Khan ever ate an entire city's population.
Is the Maw like some type of Cthulhu monster from space? Or is there like a specific reason why a meteor crashing into the planet created this? I would like to know the story behind that one.
Killed everyone in it, sure, but I don't think there was mass cannibalism. The ogres, though, do exactly that. Everything about them revolves around food. Their social hierarchy is in large part determined by how fat you are. They have a race of goblinoid slaves called Noblars they employ as equal parts pack mule, assistant chefs, and snacks. They go to war to eat other races' food and or the other races. One of the most common ways you'll see ogres around is as mercenaries, because while they are stupid, they're smart enough to realize being a mercenary means you can travel the world sampling all the food you can find, and you'll even get paid for the trouble. The gut is a sacred part of an ogre's body, to the point that oftentimes it's the only part of an ogre they keep protected with armor. That might sound stupid, but consider they're twice as tall, 4 times as wide, and 8 times as heavy as a normal person, and can reliably defeat demon invasions. The closest thing to an ogre's central government is Greece's Goldtooth tribe that sets up toll booths on the trading routes between Cathay and the Old World. Aside from that, though, they can be literally anywhere. They're happy to sell their services to all races, and sometimes they can even become corrupted by chaos. Being resistant to chaos, corruption, and immune to it are different things, especially if they willingly join for one reason or another. Sometimes they even embrace the cultures of the places they go willingly. An ogre isn't exactly gonna fit in an Imperial Nobles party, but are you gonna tell the 9-foot-tall slab of muscle with a racial reputation for eating people that he's being a bit of a slob? No, you aren't. And if someone does, everyone at your fancy dinner party now has some rather gruesome entertainment, while your ogre guest has dessert.
God.
The Chaos Demons are pretty similar between Fantasy and 40k. They're all servants/bits of a greater god, sufficient concentrations of magic can allow them to show up, and when a wizard messes up their spell, they can manifest that way too. They want to tear down the mortal world and bring ruin to the realms of man, elf, and dwarf, all that good stuff you can expect of demons. The only real difference is how they came about. In 40k, all the Chaos Gods have birthdays. Slaanesh has the most concrete one, but the other ones at one point very much came into existence. Warped timey-wimey cop-out garbage means they've also always existed, but I don't care about that. In fantasy, they have always existed, though. They're just evil gods who exist to ruin stuff. It's how it works. Chaos came about when they broke through the portals on each of the planet's poles when the old ones overused them to ferry materials and magic to their burgeoning creations. Other than that, pretty much the same, if with a small bit more emphasis on their positive aspects. Only a small bit, though. Khorne still likes war, Nurgle still likes disease, Tzeentch still likes scheming, and Slaanesh still likes degeneracy. Same demon units, same greater demons, hell, most of the named demons are the same. Where they really shine and differentiate between settings isn't their followers. Let's get GW's least favorite child out of the way first. The Beastmen are a cross between beasts and men. Being born of chaos itself, the Dark Gods don't need to bribe them with gifts to ensure their worship. Unfortunately for them, this means the Beastmen rarely, if ever, get any gifts from the gods. They know they'll always have their worship, so they get the scraps the proper Chaos Warriors get. Given that one theory of how they came about is man and beast getting a bit too friendly with each other, I don't feel too bad for them. Don't let that fool you, though.
Yeah,
While
fair
the
enough.
nations of men consider them to be a nuisance for all but the most isolated towns, and the dwarves view them similarly, the Wood Elves know the true danger they represent. In the forest of the world, millions of them lurk, and when they go to war, entire swaths of the country are trampled underneath their hooves. They defile nature with their every step, and won't stop their savage crusade until the civilized peoples of the world exist in a constant state of being hunted by their bestial overlords. At least that's what we're told in between lore blurbs of them being butchered like the cattle they look like. For the love of God, at least the Eldar are powerful on the tabletop more often than not. The Beastmen usually suck on tabletop and in the lore. I'm trying to be a hype man for the factions here, but while I wasn't for Bretonnia because I hate them, I'm not for the Beastmen because I pity them. For what it's worth though, they are incredibly dangerous to the average person in this setting. Villages at the frontier of almost every faction are regularly under assault by Beastmen raiders, and when they gather in force, they'll be wiped off the map at a moment's notice. And since they're all part animal, they have incredibly sharp senses. If you get in a fight with one while you're traveling, it's already game over. You can probably take that one on, but the 20 or so more beelining it in your direction because they heard a fight is a different story. The Beastmen are a savage race to the point that things like intact walls drive them to frothing rage, such as their hatred for civilization. All they do in their free time is get into brutal fights amongst each other, sometimes involving one challenging another for a position in the hierarchy, but usually just to assert dominance or for fun, hunt people, and drink. They do have some forms of worship for the Chaos Gods, and their shamans both help construct effigies and are actually revered by other beastmen as something above their common squabbling, but for the most part, they're every stereotype of barbarians squashed into one. Aside from those shamans, they have no desire to form their own culture, civilization, or cities. They just want to hunt like the beasts they are. The Beastmen may be a bit of an acquired taste, but for what it's worth, I don't think I've ever seen people address Beastmen players with anything but some measure of respect. While the Beasts of Chaos are no more, the OG Beastmen of Fantasy have returned to the tabletop. If you like the idea of being this savage force of nature that just wants to ruin, all the while being backed by the Dark Gods, the Beastmen might be for you. Just, don't expect to win all that often. Part of the respect Beastmen players get is for sticking with an army that Games Workshop seems to hold in utter contempt. I know I'm incredibly biased, but I do not care for the motivations.
I mean, GW has a problem of actually being able to do anything with their IPs as far as I've been seeing so far. Like, if the criticisms of GW or anything to go by on top of how some of the factions work on tabletop, among other things, or also anything to go by, GW is woefully lacking in managerial leadership and how they manage their own properties. But granted, you know, like, they're not dumb enough to just hand their license over to any dumbass who's willing to do something with it. I can at least give them credit on that. They have yet to give their properties to any company that has fucked it up nearly as hard as they could have yet. And that's only impressive because on paper, we have more companies who have done this than I care to shake a fucking stick at. But you know what? Good on GW, right? For being able to at least have that level of wherewithal to not just hand the keys to the kingdom over to a wannabe shill, to a goddamn fucking moron, to an absolute bastardized human being, a real piece of shit person who only wants to use the IP and the setting to tell some other story that has nothing to do with the lore, intrigue, or majesty of the setting in any weird creative or constructive or even critical way. No. It's, I'm doing this to tell my story. Fuck you.
Of most of the Traitor Legions. They strike me as like listening to a story about me and my siblings not getting along when we were kids. Which I'm sure is at least partly intentional, but that's not the kind of motivation I want for why someone sold their soul to the forces of hell. At least not on a faction-wide level. By contrast, let's look at the Warriors of Chaos motivations for worshipping chaos. I'd say there's two blanket ones you can say. The reasonable one is that they live in the barren, icy lands of Norska. Aside from the southernmost regions, permafrost covers the whole land. No crops can be grown, and few animals are around to hunt. Because of their proximity to the North Pole, where the realm of chaos intersects with reality, a lot of those animals are heavily mutated, if not outright demonic. A lot of these people are also almost explicitly forsaken by Sigmar, as a lot of the ones who live there now are the descendants of the ones Sigmar forced out when he was forming the Empire. With all that in mind, I think it's at least understandable that these people would turn to the Chaos Gods for protection and worship. If the only option of worship is the guy who's all about plague, you might as well hope he's in a good mood and will keep the plague at bay in exchange for a few sacrificed southerners. The other motivation, while less relatable, is also much more fun. Just wanting to be an evil, powerful overlord. Why do you worship the Dark Gods? Because they give you ultra-powerful cursed armor you can use to give them more sacrifices to gain more power with. Why do you slaughter in the name of the Blood God and all the others? Because it's fun. Who gives a damn about morality? That orphanage made the mistake of being in front of you, so it obviously had to go. If the Blood Dragons are a heavy metal album cover, the Warriors of Chaos are every heavy metal album cover combined into one. Kill for the Dark Gods at every possible moment. Let loose your darkest desires onto the world, because you have the explicit backing of the powers that be to do so. The Norskins who live in the frozen north will make pilgrimages to the northern pole and realm of chaos to become true warriors of darkness. If they're unlucky or unworthy, they'll turn into chaos spawn or demon food. If they're lucky or worthy enough, they'll become mighty chaos lords. And if they're really lucky and get just the right amount of attention from their gods, they can become demon princes of chaos, immortal beings with the blessings of the gods themselves to pillage across the world in their name. Look at this dude. He has 4 weapons visible alone, and his armor looks like he just grabbed every single bit of scrap metal around and had a demon turn it into something almost coherent to look at. If you want to play the bad guy,
He almost looks like a fucking space marine on steroids, let me tell you.
guys who revel in being bad guys for the sake of it, the Warriors of Chaos have no equal. But believe it or not, these guys aren't the evilest faction. I love the Skaven. Take a rat, make it person-sized, walk on 2 legs, and...
I haven't met a single person who hates them. Because the Skaven, despite the fact that they are rats, and they behave like rats, for some bizarre reason, they have an uncanny ability, one that I am neglecting right now to recall at this very moment, to just anyone who deals with them, anyone who's played them, is suddenly a great admirer of the Skaven. I don't know what it is, I don't remember what it is, but something about the Skaven and Skaven players are just, they earn the admiration of some people for reasons that I cannot entirely understand, other than just the fact that they're just really fucking good at being the pestilent little devious pieces of shit that we know these guys to be, because they're fucking rats. And they're also pieces of shit amongst themselves. They literally plot and scheme against each other, always vying for more power control, probably even harder than the Dark Elves do. And that's telling you something.
fill it with hate. Now let them outnumber everyone else combined by a factor of 10, give them energy weapons and the foulest of magics, and a desire to see everyone else brought low before them. With that, you have the Skaven, and they are truly glorious. Unlike the Chaos Gods, their god of the Horned Rat has absolutely no positives. His own little territory in the realm of chaos is the realm of ruin. It sucks, and in there is a greater demon of his for every single Skaven, all of whom also suck. With numbers and power like they have, there's only one reason the Skaven haven't already taken over the world. The thing their god and race embodies more than anything else is the word asshole. They hate the other races for sure. They're petty and spiteful enough that even though they don't have any uses for gold, they mine it solely because it inconveniences everyone else. They hate each other only a fraction of a fraction less than they hate everyone else. They're also all power-hungry morons who are convinced that if they were in charge, they could lead Skavendom to victory. And of course, themselves to a life of luxury and power. So one will have a plan to defeat a dwarf army, and then all his underlings immediately begin sabotaging each other to look good for the commander, sabotaging the commander to take his place, and then sabotaging themselves because they're just stupid. They eat each other for food, the Skaven at the top bully the ones below them, and this lovely form of Reaganomics trickles all the way down to the common clan rat bullying Skaven slaves because the rat above him bullied him because the rat above him bullied him. Of course, none of this matters in terms of defeating them. For one, they're rat people. There's a reason the only human-inhabited place on Earth that doesn't have rats is Alberta. The Skaven literally breed like rats, because they are. In the time it takes you to kill one, they've already given birth to another 1,000. In a chapter from a Skaven character's point of view, the commanding wizard of the Skaven army remarked it was impressive how they managed to pull off a victory despite only outnumbering the enemy 4-1. When a 4-to-1 ratio is what they consider to be a pretty even fight, you can rest easy, knowing there's a lot of rats under your feet. Or don't rest easy. I wouldn't. And of course their technology. It's the best in the world. They have nuclear weapons. They burrow under the ground and put them under people or places they don't like, which is everywhere and everyone. The only places the Skaven don't have some presence on is Ulthuan, the High Elf home, and Athel-Loren, the Wood Elf home. They can't get to Ulthuan because it's a floating island continent that doesn't touch the sea floor. There's no ground for them to dig up under through. They can't get to Athel-Loren, meanwhile, because the ground itself is alive and actively hates them for trespassing. They'll send thousands of their slaves and basic soldiers to death in order to slightly soften up the enemy defenses. As far as the Council of 13 that rules Skavendom is concerned, 1,000 slave rats in exchange for the enemy losing a couple rockets and cannonballs is a positive trade. This is before they start firing at you with magically powered Gatling guns, throwing poison gas at you, and lighting you on fire with magically powered flamethrowers. Every single one of those things has the potential to break and kill the operators because the magic rocks powering it are incredibly unstable, and it just doesn't matter to the Skaven. Other Skaven killed are other potential rivals killed, and everyone else they kill is one less obstacle to Skaven domination over the world. That magical substance they use to power their weapons is a rock called Warpstone, by the way, and the Skaven covet it above all else. They use it to power pretty much everything that isn't manually powered by treadmills of slave rats. Other uses for it include using it to boost their magical strength, boost their physical strength, as food, and as a cocaine equivalent. Everyone else that touches the stuff either mutates or dies on the spot, and for the Skaven it's nose candy. If they sound goofy, it's because they are, but consider what it's like on the other side of a Skaven invasion. You're walking down the street, things have been a bit rough with the goings-on in the town, but nothing that can't be explained by natural causes. Then all you hear is explosions, the sounds of the most horrifying mutated monstrosities ever conceived, and right as you turn the corner, all you see is dozens of beady red eyes staring at you with full intent to kill and eat you. And that's if you're lucky. On the other end of things, the Skaven are horrifying. There's a lot more about the Skaven I could say, but here's a quick and easy way to know if you like them. If you despise everything about everyone around you, know for a fact you should be in charge of everyone because you're clearly right, and altruism makes you want to curl up and die, you'll like the Skaven. Or alternatively, if you want to rock up to a fantasy setting with machine guns, magical artillery, and nuclear bombs, they're for you too. And I believe that is every major fantasy faction, and a lot of the minor ones. If you're new to fantasy, I hope this was a decently informative primer. If you aren't, I hope something in here was funny. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah, in between all of my ranting and tangenting, then yeah, it is certainly something. I definitely got a lot more out of this video than I did initially.
Take care out there.
Oy, oy, oy.
There's a whole faction of vampire pirates I didn't really talk about. For the overall lore, they're just not important, but one of them has the largest navy in the world. That's what Warhammer Fantasy considers forgettable. A pirate vampire with the largest navy in the world. Total War only for the most part, but hey, it's pretty cool to play in that.
Hey, you're finally awake.
Anyways, that's enough of that. But yeah, on that note though, I do have that video lined up because apparently he also has a video covering that particular vampire faction. But let's see. Otherwise, yeah. I also have another video lined up. I have that video lined up later down the line. I believe it's this one.
Has there ever been a single...
Yeah, it's probably this one. Yeah. Okay. Not right now. Let's see. But yes, that was every Warhammer Fantasy faction explained. I do remember leaving a like the last time, but leave a like. Be sure to subscribe, support the original video, give Pancreas Network some much necessary and much needed love. And otherwise, we shall move on to the next video. The next one lined up is by the same guy. It is Pancreas Network. And this one is about why Warhammer Fantasy is better than 40k.